Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 11 of the VonDubCast. My guest today is Erica Woolf. Erica has her undergrad in political science, so I finally had somebody to throw some of my crazier political ideas at, and she also has her master's degree in disaster management, which, as you can imagine, during this whole COVID pandemic has been quite the interesting role. We bounced around quite a bit, politics, disaster management, the pandemic, education, human rights all across the globe. We really bounced around. I really had so much fun. And this one was, it felt like 3 hours flew by in a second. I looked up and we were done, and I could have gone way longer, and I really enjoyed it. I know Erica's going to be a return guest. She is very intelligent. She's not afraid to speak her mind. She always has well thought out points, and I really enjoy talking to her in the best of times, and knew she had to come on the podcast. And I know she'll be a guest for many years to come, because she just has such a wealth of knowledge for me to learn from, and that's what I'm looking for, is just people to come on and teach me things I didn't know, and hopefully you guys can learn something as well. So yeah, any feedback, please send it my way. Like I said, I'm looking for some criticisms, ways that I can get better. If you want to send those my way, I'd really appreciate it. If you guys could leave a review on iTunes or whatever you're listening on, that also really helps out, helps the algorithms, helps it get in front of more people, and I'd really appreciate that. And if you could also follow me on the VonDubCast on my Instagram account, the VonDubCast, that'd be great as well. I'm going to try and start using that more as the numbers go up, putting out, maybe when I record an interview, someone give them a little sneak peek, those kind of things, maybe some nostalgic pictures and stuff that I can put up of my childhood, and maybe the ones that perhaps something to pertain to maybe interviews coming up or interviews I'm about to release. And yeah, hope you guys really enjoy this. I really enjoyed recording it, and thanks again, guys. I really can't tell you guys how much this podcast means to me, and I just can't wait to keep getting better at it, and hopefully you guys can see that growth as well. Enjoy. Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 11 of the VonDubCast. My guest today is Erica Woolf. She was one of the senior Lister members that I got to come in underneath when I came into the fold there, and it was very nice to have strong female influences that weren't afraid to speak their mind. It was very nice to see. It was very refreshing. Like I said, she was friends with my sister, and I got to grow up seeing her speak her mind within the household. I was already ready for that, and when I found another different but the same caliber of thought and passion as her, bringing it forward, it really had an impact on me. And I knew as soon as I started this podcast, she would be another one of those guests that I just had to have on and be really fun to talk to. So welcome, Erica Woolf.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Oh, I think it cut out a little bit. I didn't hear you.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there we go.
There
You're
go.
Back.
Okay, I'll hold the mic. Yeah.
Welcome, Erica Woolf.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So, Erica, I was really impressed with your choice in where you went with your schooling, and I feel like I might do a disservice trying to explain it myself with just the small research I've done. So maybe you could start off by just kind of giving us a little idea of what you chose to pursue and where that's brought you today.
Yeah, certainly. So I think when we officially met, I must have been in first or second year of my undergrad. I was studying political science at the time. As we all do in school, we kind of try out different paths and see where we wanted to go. So early in my schooling, I was really set on law. That was something that seemed like a familiar profession to me. It seemed, achievable, and that people who sought that were successful. So that was the original plan. But later in my education, I started focusing more on political theory and political philosophy. And became really interested in kind of why society is structured the way it is, what decisions have an impact on our communities, that fun stuff. And that led me to doing some really neat theory classes in apocalyptic theory. So what happens at the end of the world.
Cool.
Yeah, the stories we tell ourselves as a society about the end of the world. And that was my first kind of introduction into the whole career that I have now, which I work in disaster management for the Alberta Emergency Management Agency.
Wow.
Yeah, so I finished up my undergrad in political science and philosophy, and then I jumped into a policy internship program with the government of Alberta. I wasn't too sure where I wanted to go with my education at that point, but it seemed like a really good opportunity to, try working for the public sector, try working through a couple different ministries, and just get out of school for a bit and, check out the real world, dip your toe and see what it's about. So I did that for a year. And over the
Yeah.
course of that time with government, I got introduced a little bit more to the professional side of thinking about disasters and emergencies. So with the Ministry of Infrastructure, I sat across the hallway from the gentleman who was responsible for our facility emergency management planning, and I learned more about the Alberta Emergency Management Agency as I progressed through that year. So I think at a point I just decided that this is something that I want to jump into and pursue. I can remember early days dating my now fiance, and I told him walking down the street, I think I'm going to be a disaster manager, and he was like,
Yeah.
sure, go for it. And so I really did. I set my goal to work for the Alberta Emergency Management Agency, and then I decided I wanted to pursue a master's degree in disaster and emergency management. So after that first year of the policy internship program, I did both. I started working for the Alberta Emergency Management Agency, and I jumped into my master's program. So a couple years later, I'm now finished my master's degree, and I'm working in our provincial operations center in the middle of my third major disaster activation. So it's really neat to reflect over that time and the decisions you make as you're coming into a career. But yeah, I'm really thrilled with where I am right now, and I love my work.
Yeah, I would say it's probably a very exciting time to be in disaster management, just with everything that's going on and how quick things are changing. Oh man, that's so amazing. I have so many questions, but I think I'll just go right back to the start of where it kind of brought you into it, was doing some of those apocalyptic. Why am I struggling with that word so hard this morning? Kind of the end of the world scenarios, and I think that's something that has really interested me, and I'm just curious how they handle that in school. I know where that subject has gotten peaked with me. I listened to a podcast by Dan Carlin. I would recommend Dan Carlin to anyone. He's a historian that just does these amazing podcasts with really in-depth research. And he did one on the Cuban Missile Crisis and just how close we came to nuclear fallout, and how it was just really, at the end of the day, it was human nature. There were so many people pushing on both sides, on the American and the Soviet side, to strike first, and it's just a matter of time, pushing. They had all these people around them saying it, and it was the humanity of one person on each side that really kept us from the brink, and just how close we were, and how much the breakdown of communication brought us to that level. And it scared the crap out of me while I listened to it. Then I had about a week of really zen kind of amazing feeling of, holy man, that's crazy that humanity stands there, and at every point with the system that we have now, it might be broken as it is, but at least there's that one piece of humanity still sitting inside of it. It's still that one person that knows what they're going to do with mutually destruction that stopped. And I just thought, oh well, I don't see anything on the horizon that could ever push us past the point. I think that piece of humanity is what's going to hold us onto it, and gave me faith. And then about a week later, I was still thinking about this. It was still in my head. It was really, really impactful. And I was thinking, oh man, I missed something. Religion. I think religion, or people or religious tendencies, could push past that point of humanity if you think it's bigger than humanity. If you can wrap your head around this being a cause for more than what human dignity almost holds it back. And then I went on the worry side, and I thought, but we're moving past that, and religion has lost a lot of the power that it's had. And I was very happy with this at the time. My view on that has changed a lot. But now I feel like I'm starting to see religion popped up in new areas where, everything's becoming a religion, right? Right and left is becoming a religion. The lack of strict religion, I feel like, is now being formed into these new things, whatever that is for that person, right? Identity politics can be a religion. There's so many things that are being taken to that level that it's ramping up these fears in me. And I know I've listened to a couple new podcasts with Sam Harris talking about this issue, and how we're getting closer and closer to these really hot button topics that could end the world in a second, and people aren't realizing them, especially something like that Twitter hack just the other day, where you see these world leaders that have their accounts compromised and could send anything out. That could start a world war right there. That could start a nuclear attack by someone saying the wrong thing, because we've given that power and brought to there, and there's no checks and balances on it within. I think how that hack happened was they just paid Twitter employees to change the email emails for them and give them access. How is that not how with something that powerful and that important that can affect the world like it is, it could effectually snuff out society as we know it, and there's no checks and balances on it. And then things like that make me scared to all hell again. And now I'm back in and that's it. And I feel like I just keep riding this roller coaster of, okay, we'll be okay. No, there's human decency and humanity. And then all these other things come up and it's, oh my God, I'm scared again. So I'm just wondering, I guess, with those apocalyptic scenarios, what were they just tending towards, and what were they saying is the most common ones, or what we're really at risk for?
Well, it's interesting that you brought up, religion, because that's where at least my introduction to like apocalyptic theory really started. Is what are the stories that we tell ourselves? What are the stories that society tells us? And then what do they say about the end of the world? So we talked about like Christian conceptions of the end of the world. Where there's a set beginning and a set end, but a lot of other religions don't see it like that. They see it more cyclically. And so I think you brought up an interesting point where our religious stories are changing, but they're still there, so you might not be going to church on Sunday, but are you going to your soul cycle class and, chanting with a group of people?
Yes.
In that way. So I think it would be interesting to see, what are the stories our society today is telling ourselves about what the end of the world is going to look like, if there is going to be an end of the world, etc. So that's what I think is really interesting about religion and I guess disasters and the end of the world. And
what I hear from that is even taking that a step further, Erica, is just how important those stories are, like you say. And that's kind of where I was hinting at of, what you would explicitly think of religion as maybe 20 years ago has changed so much to what it can be now. And there's so many things. And I think that's good and bad. It's both sides, but it just it emphasizes the importance on what story you're telling and what story is being told to the masses. And that's where my big fear comes, is now these big movements with nefarious purposes behind them, or just legacy purposes behind them, that are trying to keep certain things in order. They are telling the stories, and they're the ones that are ramping up this identity to certain things that are based completely in hate for the other side, and no compassion, no love, no understanding and good faith to have discussions. It's all about, you can't discuss, if they're on this team, you can't discuss with them. There's no good faith. And now you can't make progress, and now there's no discussion, right? If we had the mindset we have today about how we treat the other side of the aisle and the other side of whatever it is, whatever you identify with, that has, it seems everything's diametric now with two sides, whatever that is. If you don't stick to that, they shut down conversation. And what I go back to is now, who's the Soviet leader during the Cold War? Was it Gorbachev?
Oh God, don't question me.
Anywho, whoever that was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, on the American president and the Soviet leader at that time, if they had thought that way, we would never have avoided the nuclear fallout, right? If they had given no quarter, no good faith to have a discussion, and no good faith to reach that olive branch across and to call and say, hey, you're the only one else. The way they explained it was that the American president kind of realized that I'm being told by everybody to fire these missiles, that it's the only thing to do, and I know that's what's happening on the other side. And the only person in the entire world, in the entire universe, with this power, with my finger on the button, is him. And I need to reach out and speak to him and have a conversation. I can't remember if it was a letter or a phone call, and that's why they've added that one phone that's a direct link between Russia and America. I don't know if it's still there. I think it is. that phone for that communication. And so, if it's so important on the grandest scale, it should be just as important on a microscopic scale between people. We need that good faith to be able to have discussion, to be able to have just good. Even if you disagree, you have to be able to take the good and bad points from both, because that's how we move forward. But it seems more and more that they're enacting policies and just spreading the message that that's not the right thing to do. If you fraternize with the enemy, or if you try to listen to their ideas, you would just get lumped in with them. And I think that's very dangerous, and probably the most dangerous thing that I see on the immediate horizon. I think having you on is maybe where I want to see what some other fears are too that I'm not seeing, because that's maybe where my biggest one is focused right now. But what else? I know that's a scary topic, but of all the different disasters, maybe I won't jump to this, but I'll get to it later. I'll write it down. Just what other kind of disasters are out there that we're not even thinking of on the future. But
Oh,
Do you have
totally.
any? Do you have anything, I guess, to say on that? Do you see any merit in what I'm saying? Are you seeing the same thing in terms of the breakdown of reasonable conversation and idea uh, intermingling, I would say?
Yeah, I think I have, two thoughts on that.
Mhm.
The first being that I think it's difficult to be in a position, I guess, or I try to put myself in the position
Right.
um, of people who might have such intense points of view where they do not feel like they have time or capacity to even hear the thoughts of
Right.
another side. And a lot of
Right.
that comes from, like a point of I don't want to get into it too much, but a point of privilege, right? Like, are you
For
safe
sure.
enough to have those conversations?
100%.
Because if your family is threatened, of course you're going to feel like, you need to stand up and you don't have time for diplomatic conversation. And we have to, um, up our antics a little bit. So
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting to think about where you're coming from
Hmm.
um, when you're thinking about what needs to be discussed and the tactics for moving policy along. Um,
Hmm.
I'll never forget a conversation I had with my mom, early in my political science days where I could not believe she was voting conservative. And I was like, Mom, like, talk to me about this. Like, why don't you think
Hmm.
every student should have access to free post-secondary education in Alberta? That's something
Right.
we could achieve if we chose to.
Of course.
But
Of
we
course we could.
decided, yeah, that's not a priority. And my mom said to me, as much as I have always wanted like every student to have that access, my first priority was for you and your sister to have access. And my mom grew up
Hmm.
really poor. Um, and that opportunity was never guaranteed for her. So
Right.
she wanted to make sure it was guaranteed for her daughters. And I thought that was so interesting that I'm in a position where I can say, I'm willing to give away extra of my own to provide for somebody
Hmm.
else, but not everybody comes from that place. So I think that really changed my viewpoint on how different people and people I can respect have different viewpoints than me, primarily because they're coming from really different contexts.
Of
Um,
course.
yeah, so I think that's interesting when we talk about how people should and should not approach difficult conversations or political
Hmm.
conversations. And on a completely different note from that, I do really agree with you in the sense that I don't think we're necessarily taught as a society how to have those difficult conversations.
Right.
Um,
100%.
in the middle of university, I worked for this really cool program through the Department of Philosophy called Philosophy for Children. And we ran summer camps for children all the way from 5 years old to 14 years old, where
Hmm.
we brought them into camp and taught them how to have those conversations. So we had 8-year-olds, talking about resource development, and we taught 10-year-olds how to self-moderate sports games. So, we'd let them out in the field and say, you have 2 hours to play this game, but you have to moderate it yourselves. And you saw what happened as those 10-year-olds learned to negotiate with each other. And there were tears and there were hard times, but by the end of the 2 weeks that we spent with them, they were able to just have like really remarkable conversations that I haven't even seen adults been able to have.
Yeah.
So I would really like to see a shift in our education system to starting early and talking about the hard things, like let's talk about religion and let's talk about politics and let's talk about
Mental health.
money, mental health, anything that's stigmatized, honestly, sex.
Oh, sex, 100%. I
Yeah.
couldn't agree. I have goosebumps right now with how many points you hit there that I completely agree with. And I
Yeah,
think
I
that
knew you'd like
education
that.
is that base. Yeah, like I feel like the mental health piece, just because that's one that's very personal to me. I feel like there's so many things we could be teaching children from a young age about their own mental health. I feel like with how fast things are moving and how fast technology, we don't know the effects that these are having on. We have to start at least arming the kids with the most basic tools we know can help, right? Meditation, mindfulness, uh,
Language, like language to
language, exactly.
discuss it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. How psychology, how you build who you are impacts it. So I feel like for myself, just in the last couple of years, I've started to see the aspects of my personality and where they stem from childhood and stuff. And I feel like it's been such a huge step forward in what I can do and how I carry myself through the world, having those understandings. And I feel like it's such a shame that it took until I think nothing in primary school taught me to do that. Nothing in university taught me to do that. Maybe some psychology classes, but they're optional, right? They were my science credits to get into business school, right? It wasn't that I was meant to them. It was just something that interested me, but that should be mandatory. That should already be back in grade school for these people to learn these super important things, because I feel like if I could have done more with my life, and I'm super thankful, and what you talk about privilege to come to this point. The only reason I think at 26 years old that I was able to start doing that work and looking at it was the privilege of how I was brought up, the parents I had, the resources I have to not be dealing with bigger problems where you can have time. Because again, it's hard to work on yourself when you're just trying to stay on the rails and, make money and support your family. There's so many issues, and I do really see it coming from that. But that's where I think putting it into education changes that, because now from the time when you don't have any, it's impossible. It's not impossible. It's very difficult to work on yourself when you have all these other things weighing you down, so many plates spinning in the air. But if you can do it as a kid, take advantage of those times when you're in school, and really you should be carefree, and I know that's a very unfortunate circumstance for a lot of kids that aren't carefree. And that's what's so upsetting with the education system. And another issue of it is there's kids that are coming to school that are behind the eight ball and are dealing with almost adult problems with the child's brain, and aren't getting the support that they need and the openness to talk about it. But I think these mental health aspects and tools would help them to deal with those adult problems, right? We're moving forward, and the momentum that society is moving at is making these problems, these big existential problems, manifest sooner and sooner in these kids. And that's what we're seeing in their mental health, but we're not arming them with the tools to deal with these adult problems, right? Used to be, 60 years ago, when you're in grade school, you don't have many worries, right? Your parents make all the money, you have a set path, right? And that it's so beautiful that we now have a million different paths you can go, but it also is so scary for these kids. And what am I going to do? Who am I? There's so many. You can be whatever you want now, which is a blessing and a curse. If you don't have the tools to deal with that, that is a mind fuck of all mind fucks. If you're 12 years old and you can be anything in the world, but you're being told by all these different people of what you should value, what you shouldn't value, you're getting all these mixed messages, and then you have social media on top of that, and no tools for them to arm it, and that I find very, very upsetting. And I just think there's so many things like that, like education, hearing you talk about teaching people to speak, that is, and how to have these conversations. That's one of the big goals of this podcast, is to try and teach that in people, maybe not at the childhood age when it should happen. You learn to have these conversations. I think some people do, depending on, and I think that's where religion and the loss of religion, I think that was a lot of what it was teaching people how to have those conversations with love and respect and love thy neighbor and all those things. I think that's a lot of what we've lost, is that. And now when we see us, whatever your view of religion was, there was a lot of positive core tenets within them that they were built upon. Sometimes those are corrupted in different senses, but now it seems like the things that people are now taking to be religion, whether that's their identity, right, left, none of them are built on those real core bases that we have. They're all built on progress and shutting out the other and winning and getting reelected and keeping the money and keeping donors happy. And it's so unfortunate to see that this thing that people are taking religion on, if it's going to be that much of a driving force behind a society, it has to have a certain amount of aspects of compassion and forgiveness and just goodness to be able to move us forward, or else we start going down dangerous paths that bring us closer to very scary outlooks, like I kind of discussed at the very start. And that's what really scares me, is to see that, and to see, I think you're right on the money with all those things. We just need a shift in our education to start that from an early age, because the harder you wait, plasticity of the mind is so much different as a child. These are ideas that you can instill in people from a young age that can then be brought forward and really make meaningful change. And I argue that would be a better way than some of the ways we're trying to change people's minds right now, with very heavy-handed tactics and just telling them they're wrong and labeling them with labels that they may or may not take on. But when you get labeled with something you don't feel, that's not going to make you change. But if it had brought you as a child how to have these discussions, now you're willing to change all the time, and change isn't a bad thing. I feel like change is a taboo right now, and we're not allowing people to growth. It's, if you did something bad, you canceled, and we shouldn't be able to hear from you. We don't need to take your opinions.
You're a bad person.
You're a bad person. You are null and void forever forward. And now every positive thing from that point forward in that person's life, when they get canceled or whatever you want to, whatever terminology you want to put on it, you lose all progress from that person going forward, right? And now it's up to the rest of society, because we've taken that person out of the pool, right? That's, two heads are better than one. 7 billion heads are better than one as well. But now you start systematically shutting these people down all over, on the right and the left. Everyone's using these same tactics that are just dangerous and based not in forgiveness and not in compassion, and you start shutting it down. And now we are just downgrading our ability to move forward. We're downgrading our ability for progress, because now we're taking voices out of the pool. Whereas what we should be doing is teaching people how to listen to everybody, take the positives of everybody, right? If somebody's saying some really whack shit, we still have to have that. We at least have to listen to them, give them the place to say it, and then meet it with better speech. The solution to bad speech is not no speech, it's better speech. It's understanding, it's explaining to people why those things are wrong. And I feel like that is where I'm hearing it break down, and what's really, really worrying me. And I think where you see the education thing and the education change, I think that's where both on the right and the left, they are not incentivized to change education and to have people start, because I think what keeps them in power of the right and the left systems is for people not to question that. Is just to fight within each other and not question the side. The fact that the last election was Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, and for the most part, I mean, I'm not an American, but it seemed as a Canadian, the biggest sentiment I was hearing was, I don't like either of these options. Like, that's not a real election. I'd rather not vote for either of these people. And now, okay, well, that happened once, that won't happen again. Okay, now we're in and now I'm hearing the same sentiment on both sides, that they don't want to, and they're not giving anybody a second option or a third option. And nobody is fighting for these changes that seem very obvious. From a quick conversation, we can already nail down a few changes to education that would be vastly improved upon where we want to be. But everyone goes, I don't know whether it's cowardice or laziness, but nobody wants to speak up and ask for an opposite direction. I might be too early to get into this, but I have been hearing a new solution, a third solution. Have you ever heard of Unity 2020?
I don't think so, no.
So it is this idea. Maybe I don't know if I'll be able to explain this well enough.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, it's very well. So it's very similar to an idea that I had gotten to on my own in a very different way. And maybe I think I can maybe give better reasoning for my own plan and then talk about theirs, because this is something I discussed with Courtney. And the way I got to it, I was thinking, it seems like a lot of people are saying that having one person at the top of these giant countries running everything is kind of a ridiculous idea. But there'd be so much pushback because all these legacy systems and all these donors are in place for that reason. The reason they're giving it the money is because they have one person that they can influence. If you have to influence a council, it's so much more. You have to have everyone under your control, right? But that's why there's so much pushback to ever changing it from one person at the top. And I think a council would be perfect, but we'd never get there.
I know exactly where you're going with this. This is so exciting. Yeah, because some countries already do it.
Yeah, exactly. And there's pieces of it. And so, but I think that's too much change, and it'd be too, people need some sort of sense of security. Big leaps are scary for people. So I thought, what is the easiest way to start that process of moving away from one person with all the power? And I was thinking, why not go to two? I know you can't, I know two is 50-50 and who's the swing vote, and it doesn't work. And that was some of the problems I was thinking with, but I was just trying to think of, well, that's not a reason to not think this through as a solution. That is an issue, but what else can we do, right? And then I was thinking more on it, and then I had another conversation, and I was listening to a podcast, and I thought, I think this is kind of a radical idea. I don't think you'll think it's radical, but I think there's so much going on in the world, and everyone wants to get their side heard, and there's only so many positions of power. I think my first thought was, let's make it two people that have a little bit more equal of footing, right? And I was coming to it with the idea of long form conversation being the basis of change, where while running and while they're in office, whether that drops down to maybe once or twice a month, I think you need to, especially while running, they'll have a long form podcast or some visual media where you speak at length and you can't hide behind bullet points and speeches. I think that is what has got us away. And when you hear leadership from any side, it doesn't feel like there's leaders, because they're just saying these focus grouped points that they think you want to hear, and there's no genuineness to it, and everybody can feel that, and it just feels like we're rudderless right now. Because I think in many countries we that's what we've been asking for, is just this level of I don't know what it got to. It seems to me like we're very rudderless in a lot of major players.
Yeah, I've thought stage. That kind of throughout this coronavirus, like watching media briefings. I understand the reason, and we have like a really good group of women leading our public communications, so our medical officers of health, and I understand why they can't take this approach. But I was thinking to myself, if I had to get up there and announce like death rates of 100 people plus a day, I would be crying in front of the camera. Yeah, like, and just I feel like we're almost missing some of that emotion from our leaders. But I do acknowledge that that's a very feminine trait, and so people aren't very used to that.
Just you wait. This is so funny how this is dovetailing. Just you wait. So I was thinking, that was my first into this to change. Okay, let's use the power of because I've seen the power of long form conversation being able to transform things. That's what I think, where I was talking to earlier, the issue of people not being just labeling and not having a conversation. I think regardless of how far apart you are, if you can sit with someone, I think you could sit down with your most diametrically opposed person that holds the opposite values of everything. If you sit down with them for 3 hours and try in good faith to have a discussion with them, you will find places where you can coincide and where you can find common ground. And I think that's what aspect we need to bring back to leadership is accountability first off, and long form, being able to back up what you're saying. If you're going to have this kind of power, the people need to see you wield it, and they need to see the motivations behind it. No longer that worked back in the 40s when you had to take your horse to the town to get the newspaper to see what's happening. We're too interconnected now. You can't just hide behind the thing. Oh, we know better than you. We don't have to tell you the reasons why we're doing this or who's donating to what. We need transparency. So I was thinking adding that long form piece would get us to that point, and having two people in there sharing more of the responsibility, whether it was just upregulated role of the vice president or equivalent in whatever society or government that you have, and have them have more of that role, shared responsibility between the two of them, and have them, I think, once a week have to sit down and discuss the issues that they're talking about that week in a long form space.
Have a beer.
Yeah, exactly. Have a beer, but you can't. You can pretend, you can put a mask on for 20 minutes at a time for a speech, especially if you have things you can answer a couple Q&As, but week after week, long form, your true nature is going to come out. That's been seen, and that's what's so powerful about podcasts. If you keep doing it, you keep showing, eventually it's just the honest truth of who you are, and if you're vulnerable with it. And that's what we need to see from our leaders. That's what we have to expect. I know that's a lot to expect, and it's already a hard role. And one of the biggest issues with a presidency is that the best people for the job don't want the job, because it's a terrible thing to put yourself into, right? You need a real patriot that wants to help and wants to do that. And because of that fact, we're getting people that aren't doing it for the right reasons, that are doing it for the power and for the grab. And that's what we're really asking for. That's what we're incentivizing, really.
Absolutely.
Anyways, yeah. And where I was going with that was, so I was thinking this thing through of this long form, and I just felt like there's a piece missing. And then I can't remember what podcast I listened to or what. I had a very moment, I was cutting my lawn, and it occurred to me, holy shit, this is what I'm missing. I think it should be a mandatory male and female. And I know that is going to spark some heads, and there's so much more to that. I think it needs to, and I don't think it's male and female. I think it's more basic than that. I think it's testosterone and estrogen. I think it's the yin and yang. It's a bigger idea than that. Like you said, like you were referring to, we've seen all these amazing women step up during this COVID crisis and show when you need compassion, you need forgiveness, and that side of it that's so missing from the world in so many areas. We could talk for 6 hours on all the areas that is missing. We need that piece, right? You need that balance. I feel like everybody right now is fighting so hard for their little niche areas to be heard, and those are all important fights. And everyone wants, we're trying to put all these different roles, and what we're asking for in our leaders is just to click, check as many boxes as you want for all these demographics and groups. But you're never going to be able to fix them all. You'd need a council of 500 people for Canada to get all the, an Aboriginal representative, female representatives, Haitian representatives, we're such a melting pot. You could never get to that point where you'd have everyone represented, but everybody was represented in at least a little bit, right? The male, female, and testosterone, estrogen, and what that brings out in people is definitely a binary, and there's people all across that spectrum. I fully understand that, but there's pieces from that spectrum. There's pieces from both sides that are very important that we're missing. And when it's so male dominated as it has been for so long, we're missing out on a giant worldview of how things can be brought forward and where things can go. And I just think we're doing ourselves a giant disservice by not having that. And I know that people are going to push back on that, because there's so many other people that are in between those two spectrums, or those two sides, that also want representation. But it's a step forward, right? If you see yourself as identifying somewhere else on the spectrum other than male, you're already out of the conversation. You're at the highest level. You already don't have the voice you should, right? And I think just fixing that and getting that, now you have at least representation of, say, the male testosterone side of that is dominated already. It's been shown that they have a say. And then people that identify on that spectrum all the way across, however far away and your mindset and your worldview gets from that specific one, in whatever ways it manifests, the less represented you are. By adding in somebody on the other side of the spectrum, now there's still gonna be a lot of people in the middle that aren't represented either way, but at least you're grabbing a lot more a lot larger chunk of that society that is now being represented, and not a chunk of society. I don't even want to put it in terms of representation. It's in terms of ideas and how we go about things. I think we're struggling. Oh, we can't find solutions to all these tough problems, but we're not even giving the full breadth of our solution power, right? Because we're not using the full power of what human society is. Because as much as rights have been fought for to balance us out, it used to be back in the day, we were much more balanced because you needed both sides, right? When you were running a tribe or a village, you needed everyone to contribute, right? The male and female all contributed in their own ways, and all that's how evolutionary we evolved to that point. And then it got dominated one way, and we've corrected in lots of ways, but I think at a very basic level of our major policy making and societal progress, we haven't. And I don't think I've ever heard that addressed on that level. I'm sure it has. I'm not the first one. I mean, I feel like that's a poor way to put it. I'm not the first one to come up with that, but I haven't seen it argued in that logical manner of why it seems to me. Because as soon as I made that argument in my head, it seemed like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe I just talked for 6 hours straight. So maybe I'll just let you download anything you think of that.
I think you brought up, again, several really interesting points. The first I would say is definitely check out how Switzerland is governed, because they use a council of 7, and they rotate prime ministership on a yearly basis, which I think is just like so cute. But it seems also very effective for them, and I believe China has a similar system, although I'm not sure how well that one's working out.
I'd have some questions.
And on the other side, I think you're moving into an area of talking about diverse representation in our governments, right? So I think there's important questions like there's no need to stop at just 2. And we have lots of systems in place where we can make progress. So representation on our cabinet, how Justin Trudeau pushed for a gender balanced cabinet, although some would argue that there's lots more areas where you could seek representation in terms of, just like they look at geography of Canada and try and make sure the cabinet's balanced that way. But what else could we do? So I think you're right in terms of we're missing out on, there's this concept of human capital, where if we don't invest in all segments of society and all of our different people, we're missing out on a key piece of capital that could help us, solve huge issues. So if we're deliberately neglecting the education of a certain population, keeping them out of our electoral processes. And you even brought up a really interesting point about incentivization. So what are we incentivizing in government right now? And a lot of women would tell you that there's systemic barriers to them being able to reach kind of the really important positions in our government. What's going on with maternity leave, the fact that women who run for politics, even in Alberta, are just harassed mercilessly. Like, who would want to volunteer themselves and or their family for that level of scrutiny? And I think 100%. It's important that we really look at kind of the root causes of what is keeping people out, whether it's, money in politics. Maybe personally, I think we need to do a better job of representing young people in government. But how is somebody in their 20s expected to, be able to fund a campaign that their older colleagues do? So, I think that's all really interesting.
Yeah, and I hear a million things that I want to jump on just from that, and that's why I think I was so excited to have you on, because I knew we'd go down this route. So, where do I even start? Maternity leave? No. STEM. There's so many areas of that, and but I think that comes back to another one of the points I made earlier, is that a lot of these things are not allowed to be discussed. It seems like if you want to have a discussion on this, a lot of people don't want it to happen, and it gets shut down right away and labeled as things. I think a big area I've seen that a lot is maternity leave, and I think there's a very strong argument. It's not that I'm against maternity leave. I appreciate what it is, what it's for and what it can do for society, but I think to not allow the argument of the negative sides of it and what that does for women, you can't pretend that the more you give maternity rights to women, the less likelihood a non-compassionate company is to discriminate against hiring women for that purpose, because they know that that's an option. And I think if you discuss that, you're a bigot, or you're labeled a bigot. But I just think, we have to at least have that discussion to make sure that we're not making a poor decision that we haven't fully thought out, right? And just have that balance, or put more policies in place to counterbalance to it, right? But if you can't even have the discussion that no, everything's good about maternity leave, we have to give it as many rights, we can't discuss it. Well, now we're just not having a logical conversation, and now I'm kind of off on the side. So I'm just curious if you've seen any of that, and what you think on that subject, maybe.
Well, I've heard in some of your previous podcasts that you have such an emphasis on evidence-based decision-making. So making sure
Yes.
that we bring data and science into the decisions that we make. And I find that when we talk about kind of social policies or social programs, such as maternity leave, there's this sense that everybody and anybody has an educated position, whether or not they've reviewed the evidence. And so as a trained social scientist myself, I guess, I always draw back to the studies and research and look at, of the countries who have implemented strong both maternity and paternity leave policies, what is that doing to their economies, and what is that doing to their education levels? And I think you see really positive trends in all sorts of factors. And so I think it's important to not just have kind of your personal bias towards an issue, but also look at the data and the research that's involved, and make sure, again, that you're bringing in all the viewpoints on that. So
yes, I 100% agree, and I think that's what's scaring me is when people try to bring the science and the data into it and get shut down and labeled. That is where I get scared.
Me too. I'm scared.
When people just don't be scared of the conversation. If you feel passionate enough that you are correct, you should be able to come up with a decent argument. You shouldn't just shut people down or deny them certain aspects. I think this is a bigger issue, and I see this. What really scares me in moving forward is it seems there's an attack on STEM and reason and logic, and it's the Enlightenment tools that have brought us this far in as a society. Deductive reasoning, logic, good faith conversation, all these things that are based. And now it seems lately those are trying to be labeled and politicized, all those as an issue itself, and they're trying to shut those down. And those are almost racist in and of themselves. If you use those are the powers that everything that all of society is built on. Those are racist. Those are systemic. They're holding everyone down. And I can see that argument, and I totally get where, and the reason that argument is resonating with people, because there is hints of truth to it, but that's not the solution. That's looking at it completely backwards. The solution isn't, yes, those are the things that everything has been built upon. Those are the basics of building a society, but that's when you want to spread that out. You want to get those into those communities. You want to change education so you give everyone those powers of reasoning, deductive logic, good faith conversation, forgiveness, compassion, all those really important things. We shouldn't be clamping those down and saying nobody use them because they're racist. No, let's give this to everybody so it's not just one piece of power that owns it. And I think that's what all those things are those are tools that are wielded very effectively at the very top, right? The military industrial complex, the news media, all of them use those tools to play with people, and then trying to shut down. When everybody else tries to use that back to them, they say shut it down or label it with whatever they can, whether it's racism, bigotry, anything to stop that. That really worries me. That is the first steps towards a scary place you don't want to be, let's say. I think there's you can look at a lot of countries that have gone down that road of shutting down free speech, shutting down people's deductive reasoning, having one set of policies and one set of an acknowledged narrative that you can talk to. And if you deviate from that path whatsoever, you're shut down and you're labeled. I think we've seen the results of that in many different countries, and it worries me. I think Canada is a little less on this front, but more so in the United States. That really scares me when you see that, because now there's going to be people that push back against it when they see that. And a lot of times it's not even the people that are speaking to it on this level that me and you are on the intellectual side. It's just a feeling that a lot of people are getting. And that is what's starting a lot of hatred, I think. And that battle with the noblest of goals is trying to bring everyone into a collective, move everyone forward, but it's really dividing everyone and putting the microscope on certain things like race and like these things that are really magnifying the problem and really polarizing people in a completely it doesn't seem like it's in the best interest of anybody but the status quo and those legacy powers that want to keep things how they are and want to keep people with no options, right? This all comes back to, like I said, you have no option to vote for who you want. The last election, now it's coming up to another one, and I'm hearing the same thing. So that's maybe another time to jump back into the Unity 2020. So where I was with that, I got to that point in my mind, and I hadn't said it on any podcast or anything, and then I listened to a guy named Brett Weinstein. He's one of my favorite people people that I follow, I think he's absolutely brilliant, and he's very brave and has been ringing the bell for this for years, that this is coming. And he came up with an idea, and it's called the Unity 2020 plan. He said that they need to have two people, a president and a vice president. They flip a coin, one from the center right, one from the center left. They flip a coin for who runs as president. The other one runs as vice president, but it's shared responsibility in any time that they couldn't, if it was a strategic decision that needed to be made right at that time that they couldn't have time to bring the two of them together, it would be made on an understanding that person could make that decision if that was. But in all other scenarios where it can be, it has to be done by both of them. After 4 years, they switch, and the other one runs for president and the other one runs for vice president, and it switches like that. And it's a unity ticket. Also, they said he threw out two names, but the names are kind of, it's more the idea behind it in my head than the names that are attached to it. He threw out two names. I think his left was Andrew Yang, and the right was I can't remember, General Fravor maybe, or something. He's a center right. He's never been in politics, but he's a very well respected general that is very reasonable and well liked by both sides, and very, very centrist in what he does, but is very patriotic. And he hasn't even thrown his hat in the ring for it. He was just nominated by them, saying, no, we need you. We can't have anybody from both sides. Almost a prerequisite is for you to be completely unidentifiable to either left or right party. You have to be completely away from them. And then there's a couple other things that went with it. And then they said if they get close enough to the election and it's very clear that they won't succeed, they'll drop out so that they don't take any votes, because that's one of the first arguments you see people, oh, well, you're going to split the vote, you're going to get Trump elected, you're going to do whatever. But they said, no, this is purely out of their system. That is their game that they want to play, but we're not playing that game. This is a separate game of trying to take the power back for the people that we want to elect and we want to support and we want to groundswell, take it completely out of their hands with a completely new party, because it's the party system. You see it, whether it's the left or the right, you see these same issues and you see the same tamping down of progress as you go, and not allowing the people's voices to be heard. It's all about keeping the donors happy and the military industrial complex. As soon as you see, these people that are standing for free speech on the left blocking pulling out of troops and engaging these wars, while they also are taking trillions of dollars from the military industrial complex, I just have a problem with that, right? Like, there's so many issues on both sides that are so clear that the fact that people can say, oh, it's too late, like, well, it's the election's coming up. No, here's a clear plan, this Unity 2020. It may not be perfect, but I think if you're not at least willing to look into it and give it a shot and see that there is a third way, and you're not just resigning yourself out of laziness or cowardice to option A or option B. Every time I hear somebody say, oh, it's a lesser of two evils, it's just like, that can't be where we are as a society. We can't have come this far and hear that as our only solution. It's
the only thing, I'll jump in there and
go ahead, please.
Yeah. I've heard that from a lot of people, and my only pushback on that concept is that I think it's a little bit naive to think that we're ever going to have a candidate that serves us and our views only. And the benefit of being in a democratic society is you're going to have to meet in the middle with a lot of people's views, right? I'm never going to have it just my way. You're never going to have it just yours. No. And there is some argument to the sense that if you're presented with three four parties, you need to pick the one that best aligns with your values. But you're never going to have all of your boxes checked off.
Right.
Because you have to, at a certain point, get together and form a collective with other groups of people and govern your society that way. So the states, they need to be looking at different electoral systems at some point or another. But when it comes to kind of a Canadian system, I do really encourage people to, pick their top three or their top four values, if that's education or healthcare. Find the party that best aligns with you on that. Make sure that they're not doing any kind of things that would totally go against your values. And then you support them alongside a lot of other people. So I know some people say, if I'm not going to be represented fully, then there's no point in voting. But I think it's obviously your civic duty to kind of meet in the middle with a lot of other people.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that. That is a great way to say it. And I think where I'm coming from is more looking at this from the time frame of where we sit today, looking at the American system right now, because we're on a little bit different of a political schedule, right? They're running up to November is a lot bigger deal for them than for us in Canada, right? And the time scale that they're working on, and with everything going on and how close I think we are to something really dangerous, I think we've come very close without the public really acknowledging it to some really scary outcomes. I think that's being brought on. It seems like I agree with you, and I think Canada has a different path, and we have enough time in Canada to come up with a better solution. But if you have how many months till November now? What, 3, 4? We're in almost August at this
no
point.
time to change
right?
your system.
No, so you need some. So the only outcome, the only way you can give ourselves another option other than Trump or Biden at this point is this, which I think in itself doesn't mean it's a perfect solution, doesn't mean it's better than either Trump or Biden. I'm not saying that. I just think it's so cool that there is a third option, and that we can. It's about to me. It's more about not being condemned to walk to the gallows of these two decisions, to have another option, just to have it, even if you still chose to do that. It's being forced into these two options where neither of them. And from my point of view, is I think the bigger issue is that they're both using the same tactics on the left and the right that spread hate. And that is more so my issue. It's not about the representation and the policies they're making. It's about, at a deeper level, what they're spreading and what they're doing. They're tearing the fabric of what America was built on apart by what they're doing. That is a bigger issue to me. It's less about the policies they're putting in, right? That is also a very huge deal, and you can't pretend that's not a big deal. But it's more so about the actual basis of what they're doing to the country. And I think if you could somehow shift it to a more, compassionate, bring in some of those values that I said, I think were forever withheld in religion and have kind of fallen out. I think we need to find some way to rebuild those. And I think that's what that's what this new campaign is built on. All those values it's built on. And that's where I'm saying I can't, and that's why I just would ask you to look into it a little bit, because I think it is really cool, the values they're trying to build it on for that reason, to solve some of those issues that I just spoke to. I think, they speak about it really good, and I'll send you a couple things that are just small clips where they break it down with more intellect and articulation than I can. And that's always something I struggle with. I feel like I have all these passionate ways I feel about it. I just don't have the articulation to say them yet. And I feel like I'm getting better every week, and every time I hop on with these, I can get a little closer. But it's something I've been not talking about on the podcast because I don't feel like I'm ready to talk about it. But again, there's only a couple months, and I feel like this is a really cool idea that may be doomed. But I think the benefit in people understanding it and hearing another option, it sets us up in a much better position going forward into the next Canadian election, the next American election, right? Starting that conversation like about Switzerland and the other modes of this that we're not just stuck to. It's about not being stuck to this system that's been, how long have we been stuck at the same system, right? And we've never taken a chance. We've gotten to the moon. We've got electric cars. We've got all this stuff, but we're still stuck with the same system. We've made progress in every single area except one. And you can see it in other countries like Switzerland. You can see people coming up and being frustrated by this. How is it that we can be this far advanced and still be stuck with the decision of two? I think the bigger I think you hit it earlier and I didn't jump on it, but even policy and everything aside, and who the people are aside, just age. How are we having two 80-year-olds run for the biggest superpower in the world?
I know, what?
That blows my mind. How can someone... So you look at the world and how quickly it moves forward at a pace. It used to be constrained by how long people would live, right? When you're only living to 50 years old, you don't really have this problem, right? And then it grew, our living age got longer, right? 60, 70, you could have 60-year-old, 70-year-old presidents, and it went with it. But progress was so slow that didn't matter that much. If you're 7 years old in the White House, but the progress of change in that 7 years, say it's the 7 years between 1940 or 1920 and 1990, there's a certain amount of change, and a radical change that I'd say you might be a little bit out of touch with what is going on at that day if you were raised in the 30s and 40s to now. But now you put that on steroids right now with the internet and the events and how quickly things are changing and how the world is progressing at such a rapid rate. And you expect these people that only got the internet at the age of 60, them to understand what people are growing up in, what kids are going through, what education's. They're so out of touch. It just seems ridiculous to me that we haven't understood that, okay, progress has moved way too far. And I think that's an issue, not just in politics. I think that's in universities. I think that's in corporations. I think that's in everything at every level where progress has outstriped reasonability in so many areas and connection and all these areas. And that's why I think it's important for younger voices like ourselves to speak up and to bring that into recognition. Just like I went how many years without fully understanding. I always valued women, but I didn't fully intellectualize where we're missing in terms of human capital. Like you said, there's so much of that. And I think that's another area where we're not seeing that with age and young people. It's amazing. I think you have to be sticking your head in the sand to not realize, if you are a 70, 80-year-old person that has seen the power of what the internet can do just in that, and then to understand that people have been raised with this and have that power and have information at their fingertips, and that there is not this emerging groundswell of incredible power and knowledge that is going to be breaking out into the world in people at age group like this. Sure, there's all these other things that we've lost and we're trying to learn about ourselves to deal with that, and all those at the same time that we're battling. But I just think there's this huge groundswell of that. And it seems like instead of seeing that and trying to mold it and bring it forward and help facilitate it, it's cutting people down, cutting down the talk or the conversations, and labeling young people as, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, when it's really out of fear that they realize what power is coming and what good ideas are coming. And I think that's where they're scared that these institutions that have been withheld for so long, with all these backers being able to hold them, that is going to break free, that the wheel is going to break eventually. And I think that is the fear that is also perpetuating this path of, don't speak up, just go to school, get a degree, get a job, work, don't question anything. That is what everyone's putting. And I think it's out of fear for all of these things and for people waking up to that. And I think that is what's more important. That's what I see in Unity 2020. That's what I see. It's less about the actual process itself. It's about the idea that we can move forward and we don't have to be satisfied with what we're given, right? If these situations, how they are, have been running for hundreds and hundreds of years, we don't have to be satisfied with that. It's just, you have to be brave enough to speak up about it and say you're not satisfied. And that's what's going to start this conversation. And people may try and shut the conversation down, but as long as you have the confidence to keep having them, you're going to start moving the progress forward. And I think that's why we see the ratings and people watching mainstream news media dropping like flies, and these people listening to grassroots movements like this rising and Joe Rogan getting a 9-figure deal from Spotify, because that's where the people are going. They're tired of being lied to, right? It's a bigger issue. Now you have the media that just chops everything up, even really good arguments. I think Trump is probably the biggest way to look at this. There were so many things that he did wrong. He's a terrible human, just totally outstriped by his ego, can't see the forest for the trees. I have so many issues with him, but the real issues aren't being brought out and they aren't being argued, and they jump on these silly ones and they'll cut up his speeches to make him look bad. But you don't need to do that. But it hurts your own cause so much to have to lie, or not even lie, but just mislead people to think some way, when it does it all for them. If you be honest with them, they can make that decision for themselves. But by infantilizing the world and just trying to spoon feed them all this
trying
stuff,
to simplify every problem into a soundbite, right? Yeah,
exactly. And purposely chopping off more the context that would change it away from the narrative you want to spread, just chopping off the start of what he said and the end of what he said, and using him as but it's with everybody, and the right does it too. That's why I see it's left and right. It's a corruption, because that's what they want to do. They're trying to incite. I don't know if they're trying to incite. I think they're trying to prevent people from asking questions, and by byproduct creating hate. That's what I see. I think they're creating frustration of being lied to. I think they're being told who to aim their targets at because they're frustrated. And they might not know why they're frustrated, but they're clearly frustrated. And that groundswell of that feeling is real. And that's what people want to be established by. But then when you're trying to have your feelings met and your frustrations justified, and you're being lied to again, I think that is what's really creating a dangerous powder keg for these things. And as soon as, 1945, everything has changed, and we can't, the game that we're playing is different, and all these things that could have been played before that date are one thing, and everything going forward from here is a different game. You can't lose that compassion. You can't lose that human nature that saved us in the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's so important to who we are that I get so scared when I see all these things going away from it, and I just want to look at I want to lend voice to any other path, whether that's unity, whether that's just people speaking up about just peace and love and having compassionate conversations. I think that anything that would help serve that process and bringing those values back into society is what I see as important, and what is going to end up changing that groundswell. And that important idea is what's going to end up hopefully changing the system as it is. But I'd love to do some more research into Switzerland, like you said, because there are countries that are doing it. It's silly to me that we're so stuck behind in this discussion when there's clear indications that it can be done. So I just
Yeah.
talk again. I did this.
No.
I'm just going off on this.
You know what I love is I love listening to the concepts that you talk about and trying and seeing the themes that are associated with them. And I think it's
Yeah.
gonna, I know you started this podcast as a little bit of personal development, but I really
Mhm.
think that you're able to listen back to these podcasts and really see the areas that you're developing in.
Mhm.
I think that's going to be amazing for you and for your listeners. One thing that I
Thank
really
you.
heard you kind of dance around a little bit, but is this feeling of being powerless in the
Mhm.
face of this in the face of the world and as it's changing. And it
Mhm.
sounds to me like you would like to be a little bit less of kind of a passive observer of what's going on and figure out how you can influence change or how change is
Mhm.
influenced in the first place. And to jump back to kind of education, I don't think that, and now that you talked about it in the sense of there might be some desire to keep the status quo the way it is. I wonder if this
Mhm.
is purposeful, but we don't really teach, or at least not in my educational journey, young people how to influence policy change
Mhm.
or what it takes to get there. So I think it would be really powerful just to take some high school students and talk to them about picking an issue that they're passionate about. It can be really simple. And
Mhm.
then teaching them the right avenues to go through to influence change. And it's a lot simpler than a lot of people think it is. The
Mhm.
simple act of writing a letter to your elected official
Mhm.
actually can influence a lot of change. And I know
Mhm.
your sister went through some issues with how the SERB program was developed, and she took it upon herself to do some advocacy work. And it's really difficult to figure out what actually influenced the change. But not even a week or two later, the program was changed to better integrate those people who were making just a little bit of money but didn't have their income completely cut off. So
Mhm.
I think that's a really cool example of how, if you're passionate, the steps to take. And you feel driven to make change, you can do it.
Mhm.
And I would really like to see young people focus a little bit more about um, what we can actually do from the position that we're in. And even hearing you talk about the elections in the States, it's about that concept of not giving up and accepting this as status quo, but
Mhm.
within the confines of the problem, the square box, what options are available to us, and let's be creative about it.
Yeah. And what I get really excited about too, and I think you hit a bunch of points that I had to keep writing just to write them all down so I don't forget them all. But I think that was a big frustration for me, like you said, was everyone kept asking me when I first admitted. I didn't tell a lot of people that I was starting this, but everyone asked, well, what's the theme? What's the theme? And it goes back to that piece of I can't articulate the theme. I know what it is, I just can't articulate it yet. But like I'm hoping that that is coming across and that there is a theme to this, and there is an importance to it. I just can't explain it yet. And eventually, by doing this and by having this conversation, I can. That's how I feel like I talk to myself a lot to try and um, think out these ideas and straw man and steel man these arguments to try and find ways to poke holes in them, because I love changing my mind. I was talking about this on my podcast yesterday. I get no better feeling out of having somebody change my mind with a well articulated argument, and then I'm so much more likely to go out and spread those messages to the world when I've been really staunchy on one side and then I've gone to the other. I'm so much more uh, proselytizing about those ideas, because then or you at least have that feeling of I've seen both sides of this. I know where you are and I know where you can get to. Whereas if it's an idea that I've held my whole life, I don't have that, because it hasn't been tested to that level. I don't feel that confident in espousing it. But a lot of these ones that I have, and I'm so excited about this podcast because I can use it to talking to yourself. You can only get so far. You can't make arguments you can't think of, right? And you need other people to bring those arguments to you so that you can test them against yourself. And that's where I was excited. I knew you'd have a lot of this idea, and in a lot of these areas where I'm curious, you have a lot of knowledge. And I think taking advantage of that and showing that to people, that you don't have to be exactly on the same page as someone to learn from them. And that especially, it's not, you don't have to be on the exact same page. In fact, if you do want to make real progress, you can't be, right? Real progress is made by opposite ideas coming together and taking the best of both worlds. That's how progress is made. And everything, it seems, is to be put towards shutting that down. And something I heard you say is you think it would be very good to take high school kids and teach them how to affect policy change. But what I see is now I have a platform, not very big at this point, but why not have someone like you, I wouldn't throw it on you right now. If you feel you could give, a quick kind of rundown of how you would go about policy change, but this is a format where you could do that. And if you start to get some young, bright minds, that is my real hope, is that the things I'm saying now can get into high schools and people can start to hear them at a point, because I would have loved to hear some of this stuff. I felt so alone from like a child to graduating university when I found podcasts and found all these voices talking about these things that I have, because no one ever, I felt like I was on an island, nobody else thought this way. And I think that's so important. I just think of, man, how much further along could I have been if I would have had these really strong voices helping articulate the things I'm seeing. You just don't have the tools to say it yet in any younger generation. But that's exactly it, right? These messages of how amazing would it be if younger people could start that mental health journey earlier? How amazing would it be if younger people could get that taste of making real change? Because I think you're right. I think a big piece of that, of teaching them how to make change on a smaller level and where it affects them personally, right? If it's about a skate park in their town, nobody knows how to do it, but that is where you can make change. And the thing that people don't see is there's such a feeling of helplessness at every level, because on the biggest scale, like, if you want to use US politics to the biggest scale, it's very hard to make change. And that's what's so frustrating people. And that's that feeling you get. But at all these levels, and as for every step further down, it's just people at every level. It's just people. People make mistakes. People can change, especially if you can come at them and you can teach people how to do it in the right way with compassionate arguments. If I see your side, I'm not saying you're wrong. Just, I think this would be also added. You should see it from this. I think teaching them that, and then having them get that taste of their own, the power that society should have in a democracy to make change. Nobody ever gets to taste it because everything just seems shut down. I can't make a change. Nobody tries to. But if you educate people on the smaller scale to do it, now that feeling of powerlessness goes away to a certain extent. And now when you get onto these grander scales, they are more open, and they're going to be less, they're going to roll over less and just take what's been given to them. Like we kind of said earlier, they're going to have that, no, if something's wrong, I can speak up. I've done it before. I can do it again. And I think that's what's really, really powerful. And maybe, like I said, I don't know if you'd be able to do that on this one, but maybe if I have you on, when I have you on again, if we prepared for that and you wanted to give, a quick 10, 15 minute lesson or half hour, whatever it takes, we could spend all 3 hours on it. I think that's an amazing message and something to send to people. And like you say, it may not land with everybody, but I think I think there's enough to it that it'd be good for people. And those certain people that did need to hear that and were looking for that. I think a lot of people are searching for things like that. I think it would resonate like nothing they've felt before. And that's what's so cool about these powerful. There's so many things that are powerfully relevant to people, and they don't even know they're screaming for things that they want and they can feel, but they don't know how to articulate it. They don't know what they're asking for.
Yeah, they know what's wrong, but they don't know what the solution is. Yeah,
exactly.
Exactly.
And that manifests itself in so many different areas. But I just think, from my point of view, is what negative can come from just trying to use logic and reasonability to find those points of what people are really asking for, and just trying to take a swing at it. Is this, I don't know. I'm not saying I can predict what hundreds of thousands of people are asking for, but it seems like you could at least take a guess and put small changes towards it. And if it gets a lot of groundswell and people support it, okay, maybe we are on the right track. This is what people want. But when we talk incentives, government is incentivized to put the priorities of big business and the military industrial complex, they both spend so much money to give them that is what they're incentivized to do, even if it's at the negative to society and the people that are doing it. That's who they're beholding to. And I think that is where it needs to start at the bottom level, to say that you have power too. It seems so hopeless because they have a lot of power, but people don't realize the power that they have. It's untapped. The amount of people, educated, enlightened people, have an unlimitless amount of power. We just have never tried to wield it. And it's been everyone that's tried to tell people that and change that message has been shut down for a good reason, right? They don't want people to rise up and realize the power that they have. Now they have to start being accountable to society and what people actually want, and not just to, I know it's like you said, it's definitely balanced. You're never going to have everything, in money's in politics. You're not going to get it out. You're going to have to balance that. But if we can start that pushback where it's not the only thing, and you can show the people that the power, because it would be a lot more balance of a system if the people would make their voice heard in meaningful ways to counterbalance all that money. Whereas right now it's no voice, and just all the politicians have to do is pretend that, or find ways to just sugarcoat or trim the edges off to make it seem like these things that they're doing for big business isn't actually right. And they do it with loopholes. You probably know a lot more than I do about this policy, but they don't do it out. All these things aren't done outright. It's in the back of the Patriot Act and all these things that it's just so bananas and so complex. One of my favorite people to listen to, his name's Lex Friedman. He's an AI scientist at MIT, and he's just a brilliant mind. He's Russian, and he does these things. He said, I'm going to bugger the quote. Maybe I'll put it in after, but it's just the essence of it is saying that the complexity of government is purposeful to stop people from seeing, or like the complexity of government creates loopholes create things. And he said it really beautifully, and I'm really struggling to articulate, but it has a point here. I just think, the complexity is on purpose, and we need to start taking steps to, on one side, I think it's a double-sided coin. We need to educate the public so that they can understand the complexity a little bit better so that they're more accountable to the public. And we also need to work to take out some of the meaningless that's complex for complexity's sake out of politics and try and simplify it a little bit way so we lower the barrier to entry to these people coming up. And by balancing out those two sides, we can really make forward progress. But there's so many things nobody that's already in power wants that. They like it. They like the system how it is, where you can put in these policy changes that have these little loophole ones and these little changes in on the page 962 of them that make real,
and the exception clauses, and of course,
all of that. And, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to say, if somebody has spent their whole career being successful in that kind of system, of course they don't want to change it. I find it very interesting, anytime I try and pitch to older people, maybe our parents' age, that we should lower the voting age. So let's bring it down to 16. Everybody starts talking about how 16s are not full adults. They're not mature enough. They don't know what's going on. But I also question the other side of, do we really trust the 87-year-olds of the world to make the best decisions for like the generation that's going to, like, no disrespect on that end. But, I think, 16-year-olds are coming into society. There's a lot of important decisions that you have to make in your 20s. So let's maybe explore that a little bit, especially if we're talking about youth representation.
And I think that's almost the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow of what I was just saying. If you can make the education system that really helps people understand the nitty-gritty of this a lot better at a younger age and try and simplify it a little bit, if we can do that, maybe now it is broken down to a point where 16-year-olds can be educated enough to understand what the things they are voting on are affecting, and then you can bring your society in. And also on the other side of it, I know this would never happen, you could never, but like I would say in my head, a more reasonable argument, I think capping the age is almost a more reasonable argument, even though you could never do that, I think, but it has more merit to it in my head than the logic of saying somebody isn't old enough to understand it, right? I think the way we know that people can get passed by and that the rate of change can pass people by so that they're not educated or their entire education system, ideal system is based in a completely different era that has completely gone by. There's never been a time in history where somebody can be living and not understand the things around them because of purely the rate of change. I think the only time you would see this before now was back in the day when people would get released from prison on really long sentences. That's the only time where you can walk out into a world that you just served 40 years and it's completely different, right? Cars are different, everything. I don't know how to live in this world. I think that is happening to a large degree with lots of people with the invent of the technology we've had in the last 20 years. I think that's almost a big issue that isn't even talked about, that people are so, and I think that age is 95. Say it's 110 right now. That age is where if you're 100 years old and you were born in 1920, this world doesn't look anything like it did. But I think as we keep this rate of change and it keeps exponentially growing, that age is going to lower, and we're not going to, if we don't, or we just need to make valid policy changes and things to support them so that they aren't, so we bring them along with us and don't let them get left behind. Maybe that's an issue. Maybe we just haven't realized the damage we've done to them. I think so much of history is realizing after the fact what happened and then trying to go back to fix it. And I think what I like to see is can we predict these first and try and put things in to fix them before we get there, right? And I think that is a big issue. And I think the clearest place to see it is on the politics stage, where you have 80-something-year-olds going against each other in the political race in the States. And I think that's a bit ridiculous to me. And I think maybe that's where, maybe better than capping the voting age, I think you need to cap the running age, that you're in healthy shape and in touch with the median age. You almost need something where, in terms of representation, you have a certain median age of what the country is as a whole. And you almost need to try and scale it, maybe not by capping, but have some sort of mechanism, some sort of rubber banding to keep the people in certain power stations. And I don't think this is just politics. I think this is big business, because a big business can have, Amazon has more pull on the States than half the government, right? Like everything. I think all these places need to have on boards and everything. We need to make sure we're actually accurately representing these viewpoints and keeping it centered to where we are all on the same page, because I think that's where a lot of these things go wrong, is when we have that separation where people are just completely out of touch with where we are as a society and are still operating in different eras. And then you see the flip side of that, where there's no compassion for those people when they are living in a different era, right? Things change so fast. 5 years ago, what was okay, and then we hold these people to the fire of these, people that are of a certain age where they learn differently. We have no compassion for them. I've heard both my grandparents on both sides say some things that, are questionable, but you understand, you think about it, okay, with how you were raised, I don't believe that way. Maybe you say something, maybe you don't, it's up to you. And you can't force people to do that with family members, but sometimes it is good to maybe make your point heard and try and change their decision. Maybe it backfires and it
or again, have a respectful dinner table conversation,
Yes, exactly. And I think that's, but I think that's tough. I think that is another microcosm of what we're seeing is, it's a scary thought. Your grandparents are held, and this is going to go down a whole nother, my view on grandparents and typically grandmothers and mothers. It kind of goes back to the female thing, but that's a daunting task, right? A prominent figure in your life, a prominent figure in your parents' lives, right? So someone, everybody has different degrees of respect for their parents, but it's definitely a factor in almost everybody's lives to whatever degree it is. And then when you exacerbate that, so now these people you respect to some degree, a lot of the population to a very high degree, and then they respect their parents. It's a very hard topic, and I think that's the same thing where that powerless feeling of, I can't say anything, I can't speak out, even though I think I'm right. I'm so scared of the mob and saying the wrong thing and getting in trouble that I'm not even going to say anything. I think it's a microcosm of what you do with your grandparents, and it's scary to bring that up to them. It's the same thing people feel on the grand stage. They don't want to, you don't want to tweet your support of some thing that you think is right if it might get you canceled, even though you do feel passionate about that. It's that.
Yeah, call your boss out on a racist remark, or
100%,
intervene. Yeah.
These are all small examples of taking down speech and not allowing people to have those conversations, right? And I think that is something that needs to be addressed. And just kind of where I was going, just because I'm going to follow the tangent, because I think it is important. I think you'd be the right person to talk to us about this. Is I've also heard some really smart minds that I really appreciate talk about the loss of the female, I can't remember the word, but the female influence of the grandmother and the mothers and their role in society, and how that has been diminished in some ways and uplifted in other ways. Women have so much more freedom in the workforce and all these things. We've made really lots of progress, but at the sacrifice of how we view motherhood and that importance in the role. And I think that is something that is also a really big issue and kind of hurts me to see. I feel like in an effort to move progress forward for females, I think they've also taken a lot of casualties that have been swept under the rug, especially as of late, because there's so many other people that are in such, and I understand this plight of there's so many people that need help and so many people that are oppressed and so many different small groups. But I feel like almost the females, there is things that have fallen right through the cracks for them that aren't being addressed and that really need to these days, that are good for our society as a whole. I think when you lose the importance of what motherhood is and what they go through and what raising children is and what a monumental and magical task it is and just how amazing, you really are disbalancing what a huge part of just human nature as a whole, right? Politics, everything aside, just procreation and what that is. I think if you lose the importance for it and stop putting that on a pedestal, I think it needs to be on a pedestal with everything else, and they should have all the rights to go work with. But I feel like it's almost been a pressure put onto women that you need to get into the workforce, and that is your number one goal, and you can't have both. And I feel maybe I'm completely wrong. Do you see that I'm landing on anything of substance there, or am I just shooting
Yeah,
the
I
dark?
think there's an interesting kind of thread throughout of who makes that determination of kind of what kind of role that a woman is going to take on in her life. So
Right.
I do not think that obviously it's correct for society to assume that every woman would like to take on the role of motherhood and
Of
then
course
that
not.
should be her,
Mhm.
primary trajectory in her life. I think what you're hitting on is that if there is that desire from a personal place for that woman, we should
Mhm.
not expect them to put that to the wayside to pursue other opportunities. So I think this comes back to our discussions of maternity leave. If we
Right.
value the role of mothers in our society, or even grandmothers and other kind of historical female roles,
Mhm.
let's create some space so that they can succeed in all areas that they could contribute to. So I work a busy job. I work super long hours. I still want to have children one day,
Mhm.
and I'd like to think that I don't have to trade one for the other. And I
Right.
also think that we're now in a place in society where other people can contribute to that effort as well. So I'm
Mhm.
going to obviously expect that my partner puts in just as much kind of
Yeah.
parental time when it comes to that point too. Um,
Mhm.
but I think the trajectory that you're kind of going down is just making sure that we have the space in our society and in our lives to allow that if that's a choice for the
Right.
woman.
Yes. Yeah. And that's exactly it. It's allowing the space, and I think what is it? I think reverie is maybe where I'm going. I think we need to have reverie for how important that role is, whether you choose to pursue it or not. I think we have to hold it, and I think we have to hold because of the power and how amazing it is. I think we need to, value that. If a woman does forgo that, I think we still need to, that makes it even more powerful to me. The fact that women can make that choice because they do have that power to do that, and I would never have that choice. I don't have the decision to do one or the other. I kind of only have the one option. But if I had that, I would think that would be so important to me because of how much I see the importance of that role and what it is for society. That's what keeps things going, right? Like the bringing children into the world and raising them right, I think is also a very important thing. And I feel so um, lucky and so just blessed for what I was given in terms of my parents and how I was raised and all this. That I just think, and I've got to see so many um, changes between some people that aren't as lucky, and just I get to know that it was by no fault of my own was I put into this place of how I can think about things. It was all from that, and I think that's such an important piece. And I think with something uh, so important to society as a whole, we need to have that reverie. We need to keep that in place because I think a loss of that is in part what has led to some of the issues. I think with um, where I'm saying that I think we fell out of balance with that kind of argument I made before, and I don't want to bring it up again because I feel like I was really walking a tightrope of trying to describe what was missing from the female worldview in terms of politics at the highest level. I think I associate. I have a theory that part of that. Actually, it's not my theory. I think I'm attributing this to myself where I read it elsewhere. Is part of that loss is that loss for that reverie and the importance of childbearing and motherhood and what women do is a part of losing that is part of losing that worldview, that loving, that compassion, that side that I keep coming back to. I know I sound like a broken record, but part of that of losing that is not forcing, allowing the space for women to get into the workforce. And because we had to swing the pendulum to that side to really push forward, that is a great thing. And we need to put motherhood aside because we know we can do that. This is what we're fighting for right now. Has diminished. What needed to happen was motherhood is up here in terms of power. It is a very high pedestal. We need to bring allowing them to get into the workforce and just. I think the workforce is a bad argument. Just allowing them to do whatever they want, giving them rights, right? That's what it is. It's just allowing them to do what they want, bring that up to the same pedestal. But instead, we sacrifice some of this to bring it up there, right? Which I think is the natural swing of things. When you want to make progress, you have to swing a little bit to that side. I think we just need a bit of a course correction to bring that back into people's forefront of their minds in some way. And I think the byproduct effects are really going to help us move forward. I think that's another area of human capital that we've really walked away from, I think, and are not fully utilizing. And I think we need to understand the importance of that and make sure that that is also part of the fight. And I know there's still a lot of fights and there's a lot of rights that women still need to fight for and still need to move forward. But I think a part of that needs to be ensuring that that reverie and importance is withheld as we move forward, and to keep that on the same trajectory as all these other rights are bringing up, because I think it's a downside to society as a whole if we don't, right? I think it's so important and so crucial to what we do that if we don't put a strong emphasis on that, we're going to put ourselves down a bad path. That's more so what I'm getting at with that.
Yeah, I gotcha. And this is me just being super philosophical about it.
Of course. No, I love it. That's good. It forces me to think about it on a deeper level. And I felt like if you would have given me just a pass and didn't make me explain it more, I wouldn't have got the point out to the fully. So I appreciate that. That's what I'm looking for, is, push me back on these so I can try and think, because maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just not thinking of it that way. I did a podcast with my friend Kyle yesterday, and it'll be out already by now, but there's a point where I was calling him out on these little Instagram videos they do for the business, and they just seemed a little disingenuous to me, but I was missing a huge piece of why they're doing it. And it's about building comfortability of being in front of people, and I was missing that piece completely. And as soon as he brought that to me, it was, oh, my whole mindset shifted. And it now all the way down the line of all these thoughts that I'd gotten to, of why I think that way. And then the following factors, when he changed that one piece, now all these dominoes down the way that I was thinking one way, that, well, that changes that. Oh, and now I see, you go down that train, and I love that. Nothing feels better to me than having a foundational idea shook that shakes down the dominoes that have already fallen, and other ideas, right? One of those base community ones. And that's what I'm looking for with this podcast, to bring smart people on like yourself that can push me and make sure that those core tenets I'm holding can hold water, right? I think that's a very risky way to walk through life being confident in your beliefs to a certain degree. I think they need to be pushed. And I think that's what this shutdown of conversation and just labeling people so you don't have these conversations, I think that's what we're missing, is you need to be pushed on all these. If you are confident in your beliefs, you need to have them pushed, or you're never going to get any further, right? And I just think that's why I was so excited to have you on, I guess. And I'm really enjoying it so far.
Yeah, I really am too. And again, like I'm finding these interesting threads throughout the themes that you're kind of putting together. And one that I really noticed is over the course of our conversation, it keeps coming back to, for me, like, what is our definition of success? So, you were talking about personal development and really pursuing that area of your life right now. And I heard you talk about in other podcasts, how professionally you've made it to a place where you want to be for your age, but that doesn't necessarily feel wholly fulfilling. And I think it's important now that we talk about this concept of, making space for motherhood alongside our professional journeys. There's just maybe a need to discuss a little bit how we conceptualize success today, and also amongst our age group. Is it success, I guess, is not going to be the same for what our parents' generation was. I know for my parents, it was really about, you go to school, you get your degree, you find your profession, and you stay in that profession your whole life, and you just move up the ranks. My mom's an accountant, for example, so she just picked a career path and went. And mine's been a totally different experience, where I've done schooling in two different disciplines, brought them together, tried out different positions, and moved around. I've started a new job every year to 2 years for the last however long I've been working. And that's very non-traditional, but it still feels successful to me because it's what I want to be doing. But what else would contribute to that success in our lives? And let's start thinking about it early rather than, when we're coming to a point of retirement in our careers.
And that's definitely something that I've been really, like you said, that's one of those threads that keeps coming back to me. And it's something that I think we've really lost that. I think we need to encourage people to chase their dreams and change the idea of what happiness. And what I was saying yesterday, again, you are sorry if you've already heard this on the podcast, but it's one of those things where happiness is not the same all the time. Happiness and success, I think of it the same thing. To me, success and happiness is the same thing, right? I think if you want to be successful, you just have to be happy. And that's where I think we've lost that. And then I think that manifests itself in a couple different areas. And I think we've really, in setting so many people down that path of get a degree, go to university, get a university degree, find a job, stick to it, build your way up. And that's the path. I think we've really stifled a lot of dream chasing. And I think that's where you need people to you need people in society to work those jobs and make sure things move forward. But you also, if you want to make real progress, it's the dreamers, it's the Elon Musk, it's those people. But I feel like there's not a lot of messages being sent that you can do that and you can start that. And I think that's where I think we need to shift our idea of success and to tell people to keep checking in on themselves. It's very easy to get stuck in a rut of something that made you happy at one time and you haven't, nothing's changed. You're still doing all the same things, but it's not making you happy anymore. And you have to keep constantly rechecking in. What is making you happy? What is your vision of success? Your vision of success can change every day. And I think that's important to tell people to keep checking in. I know that was what I was saying is when I got into that role, like you said, I was, for my age, the role I was in and what I was doing was maybe not matching up as much. And I was working with employees that were much older than me. And it was quite a fun dynamic to navigate through. And it was extremely rewarding and extremely happy for a couple of years. And nothing really changed. I still did all my mental health things that I was doing at that time because it was stressful. And I knew I had to do a lot of things for myself, make sure I was going to the gym every day, make sure I was getting good sleep, making sure I was taking my recovery days on my weekends and stuff. I had the whole routine. And then eventually it kind of got to a point where those things I hadn't changed anything. I was still sticking with all my running and everything, but it just wasn't rewarding in the same way. It is because things had changed. I had expected more of myself. I had grown in that role and I had gotten a lot better at that role, but in growing in that role, it's not rewarding you in the same ways, right? Because the effort you have to put in order to do it and the shine of it being new and exciting versus tedious, even in the same role and the same things you're doing have changed. And you need to always be upgrading and testing yourself. And I think that's a big piece that we're missing is that you need to always be working on yourself in some way. And I think that is what is a big piece of happiness. I know happiness is a hard thing to quantify and it's a hard thing to wrangle, and it's a constant battle. You're never going to be happy forever. And if you want to be happy forever, you're going to have to always wake up every day with that as your goal in mind and battle yourself towards that. But I think it's very easy for people to not chase their dreams. And I think people don't realize this is something, again, I know I said this on the podcast yesterday, but everyone has this potential inside them and you just need to get a taste of it. And I thought it really dovetailed nicely when we were talking earlier about politics. And if you can get a taste of being able to use that will to make change, it gives you a taste of it. And then you can move forward through the world. And I think that doing whatever it is, whether it's meditation, it's just something for yourself to better yourself, starts you on the path and puts you in touch with that muse or whatever terminology you want to put it in of getting better. And it starts you on that direction and it makes chasing your dreams seem not so silly. And I think that anybody's dreams should never be laughed at. I think that is what we need to change. I think if people are dreamers, we need more dreamers, like, because the world needs people to follow that traditional path for the wheels to keep turning. There's so many things that are put in. There's so many things put in to incentivize people away from chasing their dreams. You know, people laugh at also the ego and egos of other people, right? You don't want to see someone chasing their dreams because that just reminds yourself on a deep level that you're not doing it, or maybe that you're not happy with what you're doing. So everyone tears it down. It's that tall poppy syndrome. I think they talk about it in Australia. It's very prominent, right? You don't talk about yourself. If you brag, people chop you down and keep down. It's very humble. And I love Australia. That's one of my favorite things about them. And I think that's a real piece of what I love about Australia is they never take themselves too seriously. And I think it's in Canada, but I think it has a flip side to it where you have to. It takes a lot to chase your dreams. And when you're being told negative things versus positive things can have a huge outlook on where you go with that, right? And I think, I guess I kind of went on a bunch of different tangents to answer that question. But I think for me, success or happiness is always ever changing, and you have to be just honest with yourself about it and it's a lot of the times not a happy conversation. Some of those conversations I was having to have with myself about how things were going, they're not fun to go through. You don't want to be thinking about why you're down. You'd rather just, go hang out with your friends, or a lot of people just turn to drinking or drugs or a lot of things if they don't want to have that conversation. And that's the issue. So many of these issues that are manifesting themselves in the opioid crisis and stuff, it's a lot of people with unhappiness. They say the biggest determinant factor of someone getting clean is changing the factors of their own happiness of what their life is. If you stay with the same people surrounded, there's all these treatments, there's these other drugs that can take the place, there's methadone, there's all these things that you can do, but none of that is the real solution. The solution is actual change and making a life change towards happiness and working towards something that's going to make you happy on a real level, and finding people that are going to make you happy on a real level and not just drag you back down into that. And I think that is one of the hugest changes that needs to be had. And when you hear these arguments over like the opioid crisis, and I agree that all these points need to be made, and there needs to be accountability in these companies. That why not start an opioid crisis if you made $900 billion and you get sued for $100 billion? It's written into they know that they're going to come out fine on the other side of it. There's no accountability, and that's what's scary to me. That's these levels. But who's one of the biggest donors to both sides of the political spectrum, right? Big pharma. Like, that's where things like that, it's very similar to the industrial complex to me. It's these people that are very clearly sacrificing the society they're supposed to be in charge of, in an effort to make money and get reelected. And that is what just turns me right to the core. Just it hurts me to see that. And I want to spread that message to as many people and hopefully resonate that message with enough people. Is we're not being heard right now. We're not being catered to. There's a whole bunch of forces right now that are all having their needs met, and they're using their wallets to do so, having their voices be heard. While there's this huge populace of, I know I keep using America, but 330 billion people that have a voice and have a lot of effort, and a lot of good things to say. And I think we just need to make that shift. I know I went down a whole nother tangent there, but just So I guess going back to happiness, and I'll give you a chance to speak, but I think it's just something that needs to be checked in all the time. Success is different for everybody. And the first step is just an honest conversation with yourself to find out what is it that's going to make you happy, and what steps do you need to make to go there. And I guess if I can make a comment for anybody that does want to do that, is what scares you? What dreams are scary? And if you can try and pinpoint a couple of things that maybe you try, what scares the hell out of you the most? And maybe take a second look and dig into that a little deeper, because that's usually where the real good stuff lies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you make an important point about being vulnerable, and like the place that vulnerability has in development, success, and happiness ultimately.
Sure.
And the other interesting point that you brought up, and I've kind of been thinking about it throughout our conversation, but is the importance of a sense of belonging. And when we talk about crises like the opioid crisis, a lot of it comes down to the fact that people don't have the social safety nets that we're so blessed to have. They don't have that supportive family or the friend group, and so they're vulnerable to drugs or alcohol or anything like that. And
100%.
if you actually think about larger political movements, that's and even some really scary ones, like alt-right groups in the States, white supremacy groups, they purposely prey on vulnerable people because they know that they do not have that safety net. And if you can be that for somebody, and you can make people feel like they belong to your club, they're going to be more loyal than anything. And sometimes that's what you see in the States when, you have those cameras go out and ask people, would you still vote for Trump if he did this? And, they'll say yes, no matter what. And it's because they feel like they're part of the team, and that's their family and their social safety net. And 100%. I think once we recognize that, we can do a lot of, hitting the problems at the root cause. So if we're talking about the opioid crisis, does it really make sense that, we throw these people in jail where, again, if they're looking for that social safety net, who are they going to meet and develop those relationships with? But instead, are there social programming options that we could explore? And again, starting really early and making sure that, children are brought up in a situation where, we check along their progression to see if they have those social networks in place.
Mm-hmm. And I think on the flip side of the point you made about someone saying, would you vote for Trump if he did this, and people still saying yes? I think another, almost an even bigger detriment to that way of thinking is okay. So now, say Trump said he was going to pull all troops out of these ridiculous wars that they've got themselves into. Said he was going to end all the wars on drugs. Right? He's realized this is ridiculous. We're going to change this and do that. And then ask the other side, okay, if he did that, would you still vote? Would you vote for him then? And they'd still say no. I think that is the effort of showing that when you've checked your logic at the door, in order to be on this team, that's where you get it, right? If they can push forward of just what is meaningful to you, okay, we're going to do that. Now Okay, you're still not. Okay, now we can't have it. That is the delineation line for me between whether people has crossed that line into the good faith game and the bad faith game, right? That is what's being talked about when you're speaking to someone with good faith, like we've been doing for the last however long we've been going. There's a certain understanding that I may screw up, I may not say the right thing, and you can correct me, but I'm going to be open to it and glad that you did correct, right? And vice versa. But as soon as you go into that bad faith game, where all they're looking for is, if I don't toe this line and walk this exactly perfect, as soon as I say the one wrong word, we're canceled and this conversation shuts down. That's what we're going about, and that's where I see the delineation. And we need to bring more people talking in a good faith game versus a bad faith game. That is the real crux of all these issues come down to that. If we can start doing it's have you ever heard the story of the Tower of Babel?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a religious story, but I've not religion is not my forte per se, but from my understanding of it, it was some sort of fable about the entire world spoke the same language at one point, and it was extremely powerful, and it was too scary for
Yeah, they were trying to build a tower. Yep.
Yeah, they're trying to build a tower up to God so that they could be on the same level. So they made it so they all spoke different languages, I think, and spread them out, and that's when everything crumbled down. And it's that, and I feel like that is again happening right now, where these legacy structures, like it's very clearly shown that if we put ourselves aside, we can build these towers. We're the real power. We're being clamped down, and we're not letting us fully dip into that human capital that we have as a society, because that's scary to them. We could overthrow some of these legacy powers if we did that. But it's that same Tower of Babel. They'll do anything they can to stop you from being able to speak the same language. That's essentially what they're doing, is by saying, if you say anything where you get shut down, that's now you're not speaking the same language. We can't even we're not having a good faith conversation. And that's where I see it's so funny to see these parables of thousands of years ago just refresh and replay themselves out. That the saying that history repeats itself is very cliche, but so accurate in so many ways. And I think that's where you see lots of these. I guess for myself, I get a lot of fear with. We've been down a lot of these roads before, and we know we're going to end up, but we've gone too far. It's 2020 now. We have the internet. We can clearly go back and see us make the mistakes, right? There's an excuse for, if you make the same mistakes in 1940 that you make in 1918, okay, it looks dumb in retrospect to look back like, man, they didn't learn their lesson in World War I. They went back to World War II. Like that wasn't even that. Now, where's that excuse for us to dip back into chaos right now when we have all these resources, all this, there's enough to go around at this point, that if we were able to cut out some of the greed and more, oh man, this is going to be more equally distribute opportunity. I don't want to say redistribute, but make sure that opportunity. And like,
why don't you want to say redistribute?
I just think I think it's the tool of the unenlightened. I think the enlightened tools are give people the logic, and it's the fish for yourself. I'm not opposed to all of it. I just think if we're talking about the grand scheme of what really needs to happen, I think that it's the empowerment of all these groups that are marginalized and don't have a fair shake at it, giving them the tools so that they're not, instead of making the nuclear family a racist white ideal. No, it's just, it's science. If you have a 2-parent household, you have better outcomes. Why make that a racial dynamic? Why try and push for that for everyone. Try and make sure everybody has access. What can we do to make sure everyone has access to that? Okay, logic and reasoning. You want to make that a white? What are we talking about? What game are we playing here? Where we're in an attempt to bring these marginalized peoples up with redistribution. We're attacking the actual tools that they've been denied for all this. The society has been built on all these tools, and now we're trying to condemn them and turn them away and make nobody have them, when really the solution would be to give them out to everybody. I think once we've done that, now we see what effects it has, and maybe we do need a little bit of wealth redistribution after that to give them a fair shake to now use those tools and enact them. But to hear people try and take those tools away is completely backwards. And I think there's nefarious forces at work, because those are the tools that stand in the way of totalitarianism. All those tools that I was just saying that they're trying to make racist are the only thing that separates us, gives the people power against big media and against the government, is those logical reasoning. Now you shut down people's ideas to say, well, what do you think? Well, no, you're a racist. You can't. Now we can't question anyone. Now we can't question that. That's what scares me a lot. And that's why I think there's some nefarious groups that are trying to infiltrate these movements that are very clear and need help. These people need help, and there's some real injustice in the world. But when they co-opt those movements to try and move forward their own agendas with negative externalities for those exact groups that they're trying to put out. And now people that look at it from a reasonable point of view and see that happening, now you're just separating more people out, and you're starting the infighting, right? Now you're trying to attribute these tools that everybody should have as racist is just causing fights. What good does that bring to move those ideas forward? I think it brings nothing but bad and negative externalities. I don't see any way around it. And I think that's what you can't even, because to have that conversation, you have to have all these conversations we had that leads into this one, and to show that you do have compassion, you do care for these people, and that's what you want. Now you can have that conversation, but you can't. But that's what I see is so upsetting. You need an hour and a half of prefacing and letting people know who you are, to get to that point where you can have a discussion and say, I'm not. I want everybody to be well off. I just think there's better ways to go about it. But if you want to have that discussion without that preface, you're just automatically labeled. If we tried to jump into this, like this was the start of the podcast, and I tried to start with that of, I think it would be looked on in some very different ways. And I think that is a tool that they use. That's why the media only uses 5-minute little clips. And, if they want to talk about race, they'll bring 6 different talking heads on for a 10-minute segment where they all have to get their words in, and you can't have any of this. So you, like you were saying, sometimes your voice isn't heard, and you have to ramp it, and you have to ramp up what you're saying just to be heard. And I think that disallows people with a very nuanced idea of these really hot button subjects from getting that out, because you can't if you only have a 10-minute with 4 other people on a news media little piece to get your point of view. You got to go right to the issue of what you can get, the biggest thing that's going to make the biggest groundswell and the biggest hit. And that's not what's important. That's not giving us good answers. It's giving us volatile and easy to rally around and easy to shout down with nice names like the Patriot Act. Who could vote away from the Patriot? But we're seeing that same political move of naming these bills, these crazy things in some of these movements. Of if you don't support
the Critical Infrastructure Protection Act in Alberta, like take a guess at what that's about.
I have no idea.
Yeah, it's a bill to stop protesters from blocking critical infrastructure, like whatever that definition is. But it's about shutting down democratic protests. It's not actually about mitigating our infrastructure against disasters, which is what we desperately need.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and I think that's exactly what I'm saying is the names aren't matching what they are, but that's what makes people so scared to speak out. If something's named the equality the equality movement, but has these factors of it that are really oppressing people and taking away these really important tools for these people that need it, but you can't say that because now you're against the equality movement. It's like, well, yikes, that is a scary place to be in, right? It's a very backhanded way to shut down free speech, because it's not saying you can't speak out about this, but if you do, the consequences and what's going to come down on you. So it's better off to just leave it be. I know that that's not what that is, and I'm not going to support it myself, but it's not worth it for me to take it. And that's why we need courageous voices to speak up when those things are happening and to hold them accountable, because now we see these groups that are marginalized being taken advantage of again in terms of what's supposed to be helping them, right? People are jumping on their causes, co-opting them for their own, and nobody wins, right? And that's what I hate to see. But the way we're naming these and the conversations that aren't being had for that reason are really inhibiting movement, and it's putting us into a really scary spot, because I think that is going to be everything has an effect, right? Entropy, to push and pull. So the movement towards that, people have people scared to speak out and feel like they're being encroached upon, because some of this doesn't seem right. Some of it is really good and they agree with it, and you need rights and we need to be moving forward. But some of this other stuff they're trying to add into the package on page 682. Oh, I don't really agree with that. But you can't say anything because of how it's named and the things surrounding it and the cancel culture around that. If you even bring up anything to have a conversation in good faith about these issues and what is good and what is bad, you can't have that. And I think there's going to be pushback to that eventually. And what worries me is in the States, it's a crazy place. And if people, even if they don't intellectualize it on the level that me and you just kind of had this discussion, but that, like we said, they can feel it and they feel like they're being constricted and they don't know they've never been taught how to civil discourse and how to get it out in a good way, and they react in however they feel fit.
Or they do not have the opportunities to have those formal discussions. So, if you're a marginalized group and you've never been invited to the decision-making table, and you ask and you're told no, what options are you left with? And especially if it comes to the point of it's impacting on those things that you need to survive. So it's hurting your family, your livelihood. What else are you going to do? And so even I know that it's a very polarizing topic to talk about, protests on things like critical infrastructure. But if you do not allow those kind of peaceful protests or those peaceful ways to raise attention, what are people going to do? What do you expect them to do? And what would you do if you were in that situation?
Exactly. And I guess that's maybe one that I wonder if we differ on. Do you see blocking a rail line as a peaceful protest to you?
Heck yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I haven't thought about it enough to really give a good point. I see it as it's peaceful to the point.
Yeah, you not being able to get to work for one day. Like, I don't know. It depends on the cause that we're talking about, I guess. I mean, if it was, I know that there's a anti-masking rally going on at the ledge around the corner from my place right now. I don't necessarily, people don't want to wear masks, so they're protesting it. I don't know. Yeah.
Right?
So,
but that's the perfect. I feel like that is something where people are feeling something and they don't know how to get out, and that's the only path for it.
And they're scared.
I feel something, and as soon as they see one thing that they can jump on to try and get a piece of that feeling heard, that's what they jump on. That's what that mass is. It's so ridiculous that people think, masks are effective. Now we got it. And what I hate is that they brought it on themselves. They said they lied to the public. Fauci said masks don't work because they didn't have enough masks for their medical system. They lied to the public.
I remember that early days. Yep.
Yeah. In order, what they should have done is say, we fucked up. You know what? America, we're a patriotic country and we fucked up. We need your help. We need you guys to come together. Our medical professionals need these. If you have stocked up on masks, we need you to donate them to our hospitals. They do work. We're just not at that place yet. What we need you guys to do is shelter in place and stay safe and give these to the medical professionals, and we'll move forward, right? That's teaching people as adults and letting them have accountability. But what they decided to do was treat people as children and lie to them because we know better than you. And that is what stopped all this. And now that's the groundswell between that feeling. People maybe can't say that, but that's what they feel. And they feel like they're being lied to about this. And that manifests itself in anti-mask and stuff. And now you've seen, by trying to lie to the people, you've made a detriment to society, because now one of our most important tools, if wielded accurately where it needs to be, right, when you're inside for a longer period of time, right, it's very cut and dry with what you need to do. But now it's politicized it into a partisan issue, which none of this should have been. The fact that you can make politicize a pandemic, it just blows my mind, and everyone could see it coming. We knew it was just kind of, I think some people held on to a bit of naive hope that this would be the one issue. It's not a political, we would get together, because for the first couple of weeks, it almost seemed like that. And I thought that was an amazing thing to see as a society, that we had that trust when they said to lock down. For the most part, like, there was definitely some people that didn't, but I wouldn't have never, if you had me 3 weeks before say, if we tell people to lock down, you think that I would have argued for much more pushback. I don't think people would have jumped to it like they did. And I think that was amazing. And I think people showed that if you treat us like adults, we will listen. And if they would have kept up that tact for longer, but because they politicized, and that's what it turned into, that's what broke that down. We had a glimmer of hope of what we could be, the best of society, of what we are, and then it filtered away. And I was so upset to see that. And I just think it's so much of this is just these things that people can feel. And just bring it back to where I was going is that, so now these people are feeling all these subjects on different sides. They're not getting any accurate, they're not getting any pathways forward to make themselves heard in an effectual way. And it's manifesting itself into these not silly, but movements like the anti-mask. It's not really what they're on about. But I just think by forcing more people to be upset, not giving them actual validation to their feelings on a level of what they're actually feeling, and just trying to placate it with these silly things, it's making people angry. And how have people been taught to harness their anger for the last how many years with the political cycle? It's at the other side. So now all these things are feeling, target the other side. All this, right, on both sides. And what scares the fuck out of me is you look at America and the amount of guns purchased in the last couple months, it is skyrocketing. And 40% of those are by new owners.
Yep.
New gun owners. So you are just spending all your time getting both sides fired up, pitting them against each other, doing all this stuff. People are buying guns. Can we not see where this is going? We've seen it before, right? And then to even look at all this work we had to do to get to that point in the conversation, because you can't bring that up. You'd be labeled so many things along the way that you have to have this. And then that's why I think this long form conversation is what you need to have, because you can get to these points that are very important, but who has the time to sit here for 2 hours to get there and explain it, right? And that's why I think podcasts give that. Now, say even 200 people listen to this podcast, right? Now that's 200 people that have that knowledge base of understanding this, and at least they're walking through, even if they don't ever make a move to change it, just the fact that they do understand it and more of these roles on a deeper level of what's going on, the game that's actually being played, because the game that's actually being played and the game that people see being played are two vastly different things. And I think the first step in making a change is just having people understand that. And that's where I think a lot of the movement's coming, but I just get so worried about the states and what's going on. And that's kind of why with this unity stuff, why I'm not as fair. It might sound silly that I'm so focused on America right now when Canada is my country and where I live. But I just feel like that's Canada and America are so tied that what happens there happens here to a degree.
Absolutely.
And I think we're going to feel the consequences of it. Just like, I didn't have any say in the American financial crisis and the housing crisis because I'm Canadian, but that doesn't mean it didn't affect me very, very deeply and affect Canada very deeply with what they do. And it's the same power system that they've done in these same games that they say to keep in power is what allowed them to do that. And they're doing it again. They're building up another bubble with the housing market. I personally think that it's due for another crash, and we're going to see that. But nobody stepped up because the people don't have the power, but they haven't been, like we discussed, they don't have the power to show how to wield it yet. And these corporations and these banks that have donate all this money to keep things the way they are and allow them to build up these bubbles and make trillions and trillions of dollars off the backs of these people that don't even know what they're being led into, and then have them all crash and burn, but they made all their money. It doesn't matter. The rich get richer, right? That's the real issue. And I don't know what to do other than what I'm doing so far, other than just trying to talk about it and hoping that, maybe some people that have more power than me at this point, or maybe, just starting that and being, I just don't know what else to do. This is my only way forward of seeing these issues. I just get scared that I'm the only one. I feel like I'm the only one seeing them, and I'm very much not. And there's a lot of really good people doing this work and have been doing this work for years. And I feel like I'm just now catching up to it and trying to put my voice to theirs and trying to jump on board. Holy shit, I do see where we're going, and this is scary. But it's just, I wish you could do more. I wish there was more hard and fast things you could do other than this to actually make change. And I think that's where it starts, is talking to people like you that have more understanding, because that's the biggest barrier to entry for me right now, is my lack of knowledge of the political system on a deep level, where someone like yourself, and I feel like I need to keep talking to you and keep that line of communication open, because I think that's something that's very important to everybody. If our biggest threat to society, and in my opinion, and the end of the world and those apocalyptic scenarios are this power system that we're operating under is our biggest threat to society, we need to start understanding it and knowing at a deep level. It's almost unpatriotic not to understand your government and understand what they're doing at this level because of the game we're playing. I almost think that after the first nuclear bomb was launched, I think that was, you need, because of the amount of power that the government wields with that, the power to shut the world off in an instant. You need that accountability by the people to the people that have that power. And it can't be separated by 9 fucking billion levels of complexity and nuance and all this stuff to understand it, right? I think we need to work to decomplexify. Well, I don't know. Deconstruct, simplify. That's the word I'm going for. I went way too meta on myself there. To simplify the structure so people can understand it, and at the same time, like you said, starting early and having people understand these systems so that we have a leg to stand on when you do see issues, when you do see injustices, when you do see, it starts everything. You see someone being treated, a group of marginalized people that need help. If you have more understanding of the system, now you can make, instead of just hopping on whatever, path with who, you don't know who runs it or who has the real keys to the car of this movement. You just hop on that because it's there. If you understand the system more, you can at least evaluate these movements that are coming. Oh, well, that's yeah, it's got this, this, and this, but they're fighting for that too. That's just detrimental to the system. We just need to focus on these people, right? Because how much of like these movements we've seen lately have been co-opted with a whole bunch of other ideas inside of them, when the real basis, right? You see something like well, I guess you can go, I don't know if we want to get into it, but like the police violence and stuff, you see some of the movements and all the other things that have been put into that you almost don't even hear it as a topic. It's almost, we've moved past the topic of the police violence. It got so co-opted in all these other ways that the real issue that was trying to be discussed has fallen to the wayside. And it's
I think it's difficult with situations like that because issues at a political level are complex, right? There's lots of interrelationships, so it's difficult to talk about one without talking about the other. In that sense. But what I think is really interesting that you brought up, and this is just because I'm a huge disaster nerd, is I've heard you say a couple times that, this is not our first time. It's not our first rodeo. How have we not learned from the past? Why do we keep repeating our mistakes? And also this concept of people feeling especially powerless in times of disasters, when their livelihoods have been impacted, their homes, their communities have been impacted. And then you also have these political pressures. And on top of that, people are being told it's actually a huge problem in disaster management. It's called the command and control culture, where, you're, for a lack of a better term, your military bros come in and say, we're the experts. We know what to do. Community members evacuate. We'll make the decisions. And I know that you have, firsthand experience of what it's like to be in a community that's experienced an evacuation and how powerless you might feel in that situation. Yeah. But I think that's what's so interesting about our time right now is not only are we dealing with really serious and complex political issues where people have felt marginalized and powerless previously, but throw a disaster on top of that. And you have your government trying to tell everybody, we got it. Don't worry. Follow this guidance. But people are really questioning that at the same time. So I think within, when we think about disasters, we have to acknowledge that there's expertise in our communities and expertise at the family level of what to do to protect yourself. And we just have to balance that with clear, consistent messaging during crises where we're honest and we're open with people and we recognize that they've been making decisions for themselves for a long time, so they can do it now as well.
Yeah, no, and that trust is so important and can be lost so quickly. That's that Anthony Fauci one on the mask, I think, was the biggest one that is in recent memory of, you can see, of people were so trusting in him. Everybody was listening. Now, one move that probably wasn't his call to make, is probably came from somewhere else and he was asked to do that. Now all that trust is gone and all that goodwill. And that was what scared me the most. Is I think we have not a great handle on this, but we are doing some things right towards this COVID crisis. But what worries me is the degradement in the public trust of these experts, right? Experts in the science. And I think it's another byproduct of them trying to, over the last 10 years, been really trying to shut down these enlightenment tools. And I think that goes the same thing, believing in science, believing in your experts, right? That's all been eroded to this point. And that's what we need to re-up, look to our experts. Only these politicians aren't experts. They're just in the play. They have way too much power when we need to put the power back into these experts. That's what is at the base of the Unity 2020 movement. It's get people with actual expertise into these roles. Don't let these just career politicians that are just doing it, getting in because it's who paid who to get in. No, we need actual good, capable, patriotic people in these roles that are going to put those things first. And yeah, because now we've been due for a pandemic for a really long time. When you look at the data, it's been something that's been shouted from the rooftops by a few people, right?
And we knew about this specific one as well. Like, it's not like we were not warned about coronaviruses and their danger.
Exactly. But I just think, what could the next one be? So now it's coronavirus. Now we've lost all this goodwill on this one. Now, what happens if it's a solar flare? What happens if it's a mega volcano or whatever? I think there's so many ones. And that's some of the questions I want to get to. I mean, we kind of took a different path, but I think there are bigger issues. What if it happens, like some sort of EMP, like there's so many things in my head that are way bigger issues than this. Now, this seems like a big deal to people, but it's because we've gotten so comfortable in life that nobody's ever had real issues, that when a real issue like this comes up, people don't know how to handle it. People don't know where to turn. People get scared. People get reckless. People get, and people turn to leadership. That's the biggest thing. So now when something like that happens, everyone turns to leadership. And in the States, they turn to Donald Trump, and I don't think any way you can cut it, even if the most staunch. I think this has been his most eye-opening experience to where he's really dropped the ball, and it's showed his issues with his ego and not being able to put that aside in terms of the better good. I think it's been kind of glossed over for the first bit of his term, where you could definitely see it flare up, but it was never on that kind of grand scale and that importance. And then it did, and now you're seeing it. And just now you see a whole country, you see 330 million people just out like this, looking for a leader, just being scared to shit and just needing it. So now all these people that had left and turned off Fox News and CNN because all the news media in the States, they know they've been lied to, but they go, okay, well, they can't politicize this. They can't make this a right versus left. And then they did, right? And they get lied to, and they see all these cut up clips and ways to lie to them. And now this was their one last straw of going back to these people with their arms out looking for leadership, and they get the same thing. And then in Canada, it was same thing but different to me. I was watching the coronavirus thing a little bit sooner than I think a lot of people were, just because on Twitter I kept seeing these things pop up from these people that would, like, these whistleblowers in China saying this is real, this is coming, right? And then you'd see the videos of them doing mass fumigations and stuff in February, I think it was like mid-February. I was seeing this. I was like, oh man, this is kind of scary, right? And then so I was a little bit onto it, but you could see even when it was very clear, it was already, midway through March, there was nothing in place for people flying back, because again, this goes back to these same issues where the attack on these Enlightenment things and this woke culture, in an effort to not seem racist, they didn't put any controls on people coming in from other areas because they didn't want to look. They saw the blowback Trump got by closing the border, so we left our borders open from China, with the only thing sitting in place of people coming in was one of those, those little declaration things with the push button, and it said, "Have you been to the Wuhan province? Yes, no." Yes or no. If you hit no, there's no other checks. Nobody checked if you isolated when you got home. There was nothing put in place because they didn't want to seem racist or bigoted by doing this, but it was shown. So right there, I already had lost that was my Dr. Fauci movement with the mask in the States, but for Canada, it's like, oh my God, how can we be getting this so immediately wrong, so off the bat, that's going to cause untold dominoes to fall of damage, where we could have been way more ahead of it, like some of these countries that really took immediate action very quickly and locked it down. It was like, oh man, we've really put the cart ahead of the horse and not listened to our experts. We put our social wokeness above our experts in that situation, and to the detriment of the country. And then to watch every morning, every speech we got from Justin Trudeau was very, reading off a paper, had no heart to it, nothing. When people were asking for a leader, all we got was a shell. We got these focus group points, didn't answer anything. When they came to the Q&A, it was piss poor answers, dancing and doing his little teddy bear on a bike thing, going around, not actually answering any of the questions. It was so frustrating to me, which I usually don't watch that stuff. I try not to get my media from that, but I felt like as a business owner with something going on like this, I at least owed it. I was going to keep up with all my other sources and do my own research and look at the numbers myself, but I felt like I owed it to my employees and to my company to watch the updates every day of what our government was doing, because they're the front lines of this. And I was so disappointed in the response. Other than, like you said, I thought that what I was most impressed by was the women that stepped up and kicked ass in this. And I thought were the real heroes of the whole thing. They were the only ones that seemed to be speaking from a genuine place and actually was showing some leadership and giving some, what was the Alberta lady there? Dr. Hinshaw, was it?
Yeah, Dina.
Yeah, Dina Hinshaw. I thought she was, maybe at points I thought she was getting a little bit high on the position and maybe, giving up, but it was all coming from a good place. And that's all I want to see. You clearly care and you clearly have compassion. That was missing. All people wanted to hear was, it's not going to be, you saw any leadership in any position. Governor Cuomo in the States, when he started to say, speak to people and give them, talk to them like adults and say, this is not going to be tough, this is going to be easy, we can get through this and stuff. That's what everyone was looking for. But Trump and Trudeau, neither of them gave it to. They both, in very different ways, they both failed their countries in very different ways, but in an equal scale to me. And I think that was one of the biggest wake-ups that people need to take of, we've got this system going that isn't putting leaders in place. We have these pseudo leaders that are they're pretending to be leaders, but they actually, in terms of leadership at the base level of what you need when your country is in peril, whether that's war, whether that's pandemic, whether that's a disaster, you need a leader. And I think because times got so good and there was never anything so bad, everything had been so hunky-dory that people forgot. And they thought, oh, well, we don't need that leadership quality. We just need a businessman in place, or we in the States, or we just need somebody very woke and willing to fix some of these injustices on Canada's side. But neither of them were we asking for leadership. Nobody's ever calling out, for what we actually need. And I think the most clear-cut example of that, and it's funny how perfect of a person you are to have this discussion, because you do have the disaster side too. I think that's when the rubber hits the road and you need that leadership. I think we've been, as a society, leadership in our leaders has taken a back role. We want all these other things out of our leaders, but not leadership. The real base of what it is, of someone that people want to follow and want to believe in and want to speak from the heart. And I think that is a bigger issue than itself. And when disasters happen, that's what you need almost more than anything, because depending on the disaster, depending on the person, you're never going to be the expert, but we need someone that we trust and we believe that is going to actually go and talk to these experts and do the right thing. But when you're just giving us fluff and unicorns and rainbows and really nothing of substance, we don't have that trust. And I think that's where that breakdown also, and then that dovetails with the other breakdown of the attack on experts and on science that I see it. But it's just not a melting pot, just dry kindling for an explosion of negative externalities when we have that, right? And that's what we've seen ourselves. It was hard to see the forest for the trees at a certain point, but then when something like that happens, you can see it very clearly right away. And I think that's where I was a little bit disappointed in the leadership in the major positions around my general scope of where I see in Canada and the US.
Yeah, absolutely. I do really agree with you in terms of the public communication that we've been seeing from Justin Trudeau. But at the same time, I think it's an interesting point of when we talk about looking for leadership in these crises. What do we value in terms of leadership? So if you had Chrystia Freeland up in front of Canada doing a media availability and she started crying, would that be, seen as weakness on her point? And, I've also seen, the New Zealand Prime Minister doing media briefings in her pajamas at home. Like that's also, to me, that seems very real, but to a lot of people that would seem, unprofessional and not becoming of somebody who holds that degree of power. So I think it's really interesting that when we say, this is something we value, we really delve into what that means in terms of the people that we're electing to these positions as well. So go ahead.
And I just, not to jump in when you just finally got to start talking again, but I think that is exactly what it is. People are so scared to show a little bit of vulnerability, show a little bit of themselves and who they are, like doing a broadcast in their pajamas, because like you're saying, you're never going to impress anyone. But this I need to impress everybody, make everyone happy mentality is what's got us into this mess. That's what's got us these focus group speeches that amounts for nothing, because people are so worried about stepping any little bit off the tangent line, showing a little bit of personality or any of those things. Everyone's just trying to be so cookie cutter that's what we get, and that's what we've asked for. When we have a leader that doesn't actually, because they're so scared to do it right, he doesn't want to step out, and that's a system we've created where the system they created where there's no compassion and no goodwill to give that person the benefit of the doubt that they are trying, right? Like I agree with you. If you tried to have Trump or Trudeau do a broadcast in his pajamas from that might show a little vulnerability, but there's no space for any reasonable any benefit of the doubt where people would jump right on him and say, what is this idiot doing? What a clown, and all this stuff. And I think that's very easy to do, but that's the reason, because we have no space, like we were talking about, for creating space for women to hold workplace and motherhood roles. We have to create space for our leaders to mess up. We have to stop this absolute madness that everyone has to be perfect all the time, and you can never say you made a mistake. You can never admit a mistake. You can never change your mind. That's what's really bringing these things to this point, because now everyone's so scared to make a mistake and get canceled that you just, what's the most milquetoast bland, that will get me through this 20 minutes where I'm on TV and off again without stepping on any landmines. And now that is the complete opposite of what you need, of the foundations for making real progress. That's the complete opposite of it, right? In my opinion. And I see that as such a dangerous ideal to put that to. But then I guess I'd throw that back to you, is how do we incentivize that and change that dynamic as a culture so that we can create that space for that, and maybe, like we're talking about earlier, incentivize a leader with more of those qualities at the risk of the obvious next externalities that would come from it, and maybe create a more supportive group for them. Because right off the top of my head, I can't think of many right now other than this.
Yeah. I think it comes with just incentivizing diversity in our leadership positions. I know you were really shying away from the word redistribution itself, but throughout
Mhm.
this podcast, I've really heard you talking about concepts like redistribution of power. So instead of having, one head of government, what would that look like if it was two? Um, or if we
Mhm.
elected different types of people into positions of power. So I think if we, look at what the systemic barriers are, so even if it's something as simple as in the United States, you can't run for office until
Mhm.
for executive office until you're 35. Um, what is that incentivizing? And the other thing is, we've talked about a lot of older people in positions of power in politics. But if you look at, how much money does it take to run? What kind of time commitment is it? It's unlikely that, a young father with 3 children is going to have the resources or the time to devote to office. So what is that
Yeah.
setting us up? And even if you look at, I know in Grand Prairie is probably similar as my hometown, but your mayor and council are usually older, retired folk,
Mhm.
and that influences the decisions that they're making. So by really looking at those systemic barriers and seeing what we can change,
Mhm.
and then how that's influencing who gets to make the decisions or who is in a leadership position in times of crisis.
Mhm.
I think we'll start to move the needle a little bit on like what's acceptable leadership, and what does a successful leader look like.
Mhm. So I just had a couple of really big things. I don't want to lose. I think I almost was answering my own question. I think the question I posed to you, I think my earlier solution of adding some sort of long form element of discussion, so you get to know the personality and who the person is, would also create that space. If you hear somebody talk, 3 hours a week, every week, from a place, you will now understand. You understand what they're going through, and you have that freedom of giving them a little more space to move, and space to learn, and space to say, hey, I made a mistake on this wasn't very good. I think that's a big piece of it. And then I think going back to what I'm hearing is with these people that want to get in these positions, right? Maybe the best person for a role would be that father with 3 kids, and just doesn't have, right. Again, I know I already said it once on this podcast, but the people that would be best for these positions of power don't want them, and the people that
Mm-hmm.
would be worst for these positions are the ones scrambling hard enough, carrying people down, kicking people off the mountain to get up there, that are doing it, right. That politics system, which is, again, not to bring it back to this Union 2020, but the biggest piece I loved out of it was him calling out that General Fraber or whatever, because I love the idea of, not, I shouldn't say I love the idea of conscription, but the idea of patriotically saying, we need you. I know you're not a politician, but we don't need politicians. We have politicians, and that's what gets us in. If you do that 40-year career path through all this corruption and backdoor deals, you're coming out the other side already past the point of what we should accept, just almost as a rule. And the idea that you can um,
You have a
um,
track record of honesty, and yeah,
yeah, you have a track record of honesty, and more than, maybe not more than honesty, but just on the same level of honesty is capability too. And that's what
sure.
he's saying. That was, I think, the three tenets of this unity plan was, you want somebody that is ultimately extremely patriotic, extremely capable, and extremely honest, right? And has a track record of those things, but not in politics, right? I think you need those people that are career politicians to keep the things working, but I think at the very top, you almost don't. You almost want somebody that is coming in as an outsider, right? That you can show, and that you almost want to tap as a society. We should be able the ones to pick and force it on. And they could say no, of course, right? Like, I feel like if you did that in the States and you put it out, the overwhelming, I bet Joe Rogan would be the person that would get it. Just, I know how silly that sounds, and he's a MMA commentator, but just in terms of populism, what people would want, I bet you he'd be the one. He would say no, right? So then you'd go down to more reasonable ones. I think it's a dangerous game to play, because you'd have to rely on them picking somebody good, and not, just the another Trump that is just a person, an internet personality. But I think if you did it the right way, you could go out and you could choose someone, find one of those persons that would be great at the job but doesn't want it, and just say, no, I know you don't want it, but we need you right now. We need people, and like you say, open that up so it's not just one person, so that you're giving 7 people the tap on the shoulder that say, you are an expert in this area. We need you. This is your call. This is your call to action. As a country, we have spoken, and everybody's open to that. And we make that as it's a complete honor. Now it's not something you chase and you have to, kick and grind to. It doesn't matter. You don't have to get into politics. You don't have to muddy yourself with that. You just have to be a good person, show what you can do, be open in your values as you move through the world. And then eventually, if you're doing that, you might get tapped. You can say yes or no, but it's a huge honor too. And I think that would be a huge swing if we could change the mindset to that. And now you don't have any of these people that have been beholden to all this military industrial complex and big pharma and all these people that have been corrupting them their whole way up to that level, their whole ascension. You have somebody that just comes in, and it's not to say, and I know that would sound scary to people who have someone that has no political knowledge hopping to that role, but you're surrounded by all these people, but you need someone just with honesty and integrity to not let them sway you away from your core, right? We need to elect someone with their core that is also capable, that can lean on experts, because we've gone too far. The shift and pace that we've grown to is being a president 100 years ago was very different than being a president today. The amount of things you had to know, you had to be knowledge, like your knowledge of war, your knowledge of war technology, your knowledge of policy, your knowledge of food, and everything is just scaled up on such an incredible level that it shows every 4-year election cycle the ridiculousness of having one person in that role when it's so impossible, when it's such an impossible role, and to have all that knowledge is more and more obvious every 4 years because of the rate of change, right? But I don't know where I was going with that, but I think it's becoming more and more obvious that we need more people, and we need more people in that role, and we need to have the freedom for them to say, I don't know, I need to tap my expert on the shoulder and let him take this one, right? Which is, I think, nice to see during this COVID crisis, a lot of them backing out and having these people that are experts, like Dr. Dina Hinshaw, that could hop on and make her voice heard and give us a little taste of that leadership. But we need to have that more. We need to have that at every level. It shouldn't just be because a pandemic shouldn't force us into leaning on our experts. That should be our modus operandi of all times. If it's something with economics or something with race, you get those people that are affected into that conversation. You find experts in those fields and let them have long form, transparent discussion in front of people. That's what's missing. We need to have. It would be a bifolded solution, because now you are getting representation and experts in their fields there, and you're also showing society the back end process and the transparency, so that you're proving to them that you have thought about this and you're not just doing this willy-nilly. Because I think that's one of the biggest issues right now, is because they don't have representation. If you're trying to make a big movement on race, but they don't even have a representation at the door to make their voice heard from their side, and you're just trying to tell them what the best thing for them is, that doesn't give anybody confidence that that's the right decision. Well, how do we know you even listen to those voices of those minority groups that have this said? You need to find the experts in that area with your own experts of your panel and have them work together, and the solutions that come out of that in some sort of long form, I think it should be transparent and on some sort of public stage, and that's where we go forward. It's a step towards public governance, right? And more accountability. It's bringing accountability to society as a more so, because it's just transparent, and not even accountability, because you wouldn't have to watch it unless you were forced. But if you were a citizen that valued being a knowledgeable part of the republic, or whatever verbiage you have for that, if that's something you value, you would watch those and you would have your feelings hurt. And now it opens up all these people that it's so over complex, we can't ever be heard, we don't know what goes on behind those closed doors. It opens them up. Now people can start to learn them, right? And now people can hear what went into that policy that they went and see the things that changed. And if they really disagree with it and had a strong, maybe that pushes them into that of maybe chasing that as a career path and getting into that and trying to put themselves into a position where they can make more of that change, because they get to see how the sausage is made. And I think that is part of what we need to. I think it made sense you need representative government for a long time when people were on horses and couldn't go there. We're so interconnected now that there needs to be an equal shift forward in bringing voices to the table, right? And we need to find the places that are identify and remove or modify the people that are standing in the way of that, right? And I think that's where I see a lot of these things as my issues, is why can't we just try and identify those that are very clearly standing in the way of progress, almost explicitly at most points, and do something about it, right? Because these people all need a seat at the table, but there's so many things standing in the way of that.
I guess we would have to first agree on what those barriers are. So
yeah, and I guess that's probably the best place to start is, what are those barriers? And I just think it's that's what hoping this conversation can be, is trying to establish those in a safe space, that you're not going to get attacked for some of these. One of the best I meant to say one of the best quotes I've heard in the last couple of weeks is you need to have dispassionate conversation in order to come up with passionate responses. A lot of times you need to have really uncomfortable conversations and really go down to game theory and looking at it from all sides and going to some uncomfortable places to see what it has to give to come out of it on the other end with a compassionate solution, right? But it seems like we're trying to put forward the best solution without having it's like we're foregoing those really compassionate solutions by not allowing the dispassionate conversation that would get us to them and just taking the next best solution we can have without having those dark conversations. And that's what's putting us down this bad path and what's closing down these things, because if you can try and frame things in some of the ways that people are trying to these days of how these issues are, even when you talk to people part of those groups, they say that's not even accurate to what we're so far off the pace, and so we're into these weird dynamics. I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going with that. I'm just so excited about talking this stuff. I just get on my tangents.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. I really love it too. I think something that is so important, in policy making, for example, is being able to use data and science to identify the root causes of an issue. And again, when you said, compassionate responses, I think that's such an interesting term, because not too many people ensure that the response or the policy solution itself is compassionate overall. So I'm just thinking of like a policy issue, like overpopulation. So if you talk to people about like what could be solutions to overpopulation, they would say, like mandating birth control, forced sterilization, child capping policies, that kind of thing. But none of those are compassionate responses to the problem. But if you take science and research and look at what's actually been working in other countries, you see things like increasing access to education for women is actually one of the biggest drivers of reducing the birth population.
Exactly.
So that could be a compassionate response, right? Like there's multiple ways to skin a cat. So like throw them all on the table and see which ones meet that, threshold for being compassionate. And I think obviously that would be a way to go, but don't consider those other options that don't meet that basic threshold.
Exactly. And I think that's where it is, because a lot of the times, right, they're not compassionate responses, like you said, but maybe there's a piece in there of really important. Maybe if you, what's the most uncomfortable one you said, like, what's the most uncompassionate, craziest way to respond? So I guess genocide, I guess, is the most far off, the most awful way you could find a solution to overpopulation. But I still firmly believe that we should be able to have a discussion just with pure logic about that, and because there might be something in there, right? I feel like there's a terrible point to be making, but I just think maybe there's some piece in there that would be made that we could
let's talk about the problem.
I just think
let's not be scared to talk about the problem.
Let's I feel like we're so scared these days to talk about sketchy subject and awful things like that. We're so just hands off because we don't want to get labeled with it or even touch that subject, because now you're tainted forevermore if you ever bring up a subject to that, to just explore it, even if you all you do is be reinforced with, we're right, this is terrible, there's nothing of worth in this, but at least we took the try, and now we can move on to the next one. And as long as we've fully delved into them to find all these things, that's what we're going to bring forward. And I think it's just on much less dark scales, I guess. I'm trying to find the right words for this, but if you take an issue that's not even that far, but now people are even scared to talk about, I'll go back to maternity. People don't even aren't allowed to even discuss the positive and negative of maternity leave to make sure it's still bringing the positive externalities that we're trying while lowering the negative ones. But you almost can't even bring that up, because if you want to discuss the negative sides of maternity, you're automatically labeled a bigot, and you can't move forward on it. And even if it's your goal was to try and further women's right and make the best space for them to succeed, you can't, because you're scared to even enter that conversation. I see that it's the same conversation, but on large scales, right? If that's on race, if that's on overpopulation, if that's on any kind of matter, you just have to be able to look at all sides and have a reasonable conversation without fear of having it shut down just off the hop because of the subject matter itself.
Yeah, right? Well, one thing that I really run into in my own profession is the unwillingness to talk about disaster responses after we've responded to them. So there's this concept of doing a hot wash after a response to an emergency, where you sit the team down and you talk about what went well, what needs to be improved, what do we do going forward. And those are, I've seen, just incredibly difficult conversations to have. Nobody wants to admit that their response could have been improved. Nobody wants to revisit the dark times of their community burning down. And so oftentimes we really try to sweep that conversation under the rug. But what it results in is us making the same mistakes over and over, where, you know, this province has experienced how many disasters in the last 10 years. And this is not only specific to our province, but a lot of jurisdictions, but their responses kind of stuck in the past or antiquated, and we don't necessarily move forward because it's an uncomfortable subject to talk about.
Yeah, and definitely, it's funny you say that, and just the timing of everything. I'm actually having on the fire chief, Jamie Coots from Slave Lake. That was the acting fire chief during the Slave Lake fire on Friday. To have
cool.
that discussion, kind of go through that. And I do think that is a big issue and that's why I want, and that's a big piece of why I want to have him on, is because, you know, I feel like after the fact, like you said, everyone had their own opinion of what, everyone's an expert. Oh, you should have done this, but I just can't imagine being in that position of having to make those decisions on the fly with that little amount of, there was so much confusion. All the phones were down. We couldn't, you know, like nobody could get a hold of each other on a phone.
And if you don't have time to talk to your experts, what do you do?
Yeah, the fire's going towards the pump house. The power's out for the town, so you can't. So the pump house is down. So you can't fight the fire. There's no water getting to the town, so you can't fight any of these homes that are on fire. All this stuff. So then my dad actually went and grabbed one of his oil field generators and tried to bring it up to the pump house to get that running. They ended up getting the power back on before that, but they're just trying to figure out solutions. But that's just that small town community of pulling resources where we live right by the pump house, so it's literally down the street.
And again, the expertise that exists within your own community, you know, your dad was able to respond and knew what he was doing faster than, you know, calling in somebody from outside of the community to fix that. So, but again, there's still a tendency to discredit that type of support or disallow it.
Exactly. And then to not have that freedom afterwards, like I said, and what I'm hoping I can do for him is to allow him that vulnerability to, you know, I'm hoping that he can tell me where they thought they did well and where they didn't do well. And I'm hoping I can provide a good faith environment, like I'm saying, where I understand that and, you know, can go with him down that path of what you were dealing with at that time and to have that, because that's how you move forward. Allowing people to admit their mistakes is how we get better. Because right after the Slave Lake fire, it was told that there was all these things being put in. They cut all this brush around the town so that it would never happen again. They said they put all these policies. There will never be another wildfire that goes through a town ever again in Alberta's history. And then 3 years later, Fort McMurray happened. Like 5 years later, maybe 6 years. But I remember hearing that specific. I remember hearing the words, "This will never happen again to any other community in Alberta after this," because we put all these things in change. But clearly it happened again, right? Like, I don't know. And I wonder, with you saying that, how much of it is not having enough freedom to accurately discuss what happened so we could get better, and how much is just, I know wildfires are one of those things that they're so unpredictable. And so I feel like it's almost impossible to lay any blame just because of they almost have a mind of their own, right? And that was something that we got to see during the fire, of just like the way the wind changes, it starts to create its own wind, and then you're fighting it and you think it's going to go one way, and then it creates its own wind and pulls it back this way, and then trees are lighting and pine cones.
And there's a lightning tornado, and
then pine cones light up and explode and go flying off the trees and go land on roofs of other houses. And now you have these weird pockets of, okay, the fire is mainly over here, but there's a couple random houses over here that somehow lit on fire because of these pine cones fire, or whatever it was. That's a story I heard. I'll definitely ask him on Friday. But just the chaos and the humanity that you're dealing with at that time. And then you'd think, if there's anywhere else in the world where you'd have the freedom to say, hey, we might have made a few mistakes, it'd be that kind of chaos, that, or maybe war, where you'd be able to, it's too much. What do you expect out of me? I did the best I could, right? You'd think that'd be there. But it seems like the way we're going, the further we're getting away from those compassion in all situations, even the situations like that where it seems most obvious you should have that, it's going away there too. And I wonder if that's preventing the disaster management as a whole. I guess you'd be a better expert. Tell me on that, of if that is also a microcosm of what's happening there, and not allowing people to have that. But I think it's good that you guys are pushing to reconvene and have a debrief, or whatever you call it, after a disaster, to really have those tough conversations and figure it out so you can be better. Because at that scale, it's people's lives that are depending on it, right? There's no space to me when people's lives, and I felt about this is how I felt about the pandemic, and them lying about that too. When people's lives are at risk, there's no room for anything less than the most highest level reasoning and logic to be applied to this problem, so we can
Absolutely.
get better, because lives matter, right? I don't care about your ideologies or your cultures and all that. That all goes out the wayside when human lives are at risk, right? And I feel like if we can't do it there, where can we, right? That's the last bastion. If now that's entering those realms where you can't have the freedom to say you made a mistake, or the freedom to have a tough decision if it's what's going to help save some lives, you have to be able to have those conversations almost more so than anywhere else, really. And that's a huge piece of it. So I guess, not to change subjects, but I'm curious, is there a mental health side to the disaster management? Like, when you went through your schooling, do they talk about how it affects you? Because I know when you look at police officers and firemen, there's a lot of PTSD that comes along with it, because you're dealing with some really high level things. People's lives are at stake, and you get to see a lot of I don't know, darkness and chaos. And I just wonder how much focus is put on making sure that you guys are staying healthy and working on yourselves to be able to not overwhelm you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's going to be obviously two distinct sides to that. Those for the responders themselves,
Right.
and for the communities that have been impacted, or the populations that have felt the effects of the disaster. So I think the most difficult thing, and again, I'll preface this by saying I'm not a first responder, so I'm not an EMT or a fire chief or anything like that. But I have been working in our operations center, around the clock for the last 4 months, and that's part of my job in disasters. And the thing that's been difficult for me is this culture of, like you said, there's no room for errors, and you got to be decisive, and you got to know your stuff. And as somebody who's really looking to become a leader in the field, I hold myself to a very high standard of, I'm first one in, last one out. I put everything on my home front to the side, and I'm focused on work, and I think it's really difficult to wake up 4 months later and see that, this has become your life now. And this is maybe not the healthiest way to be living in the long term. So there's a good amount of pressure that I think anybody probably in the emergency response field or disaster management field puts on themselves to perform at the highest capacity they probably can. And not necessarily, and almost, I really do get the sense of, like, if you were to say this is too much, or I need a day off, or I need a vacation, that's seen as weakness, especially as somebody who is not traditionally the person you see in this field. A lot of people in the field are ex-first responders, 40-year-old military dudes. They're not somebody like me. So, I'm really trying to show up and gain that respect. And so you don't want to be the person to tap out. So that's certainly an aspect that I've been trying to monitor myself on over this activation in particular, because it's a slow burn, longer disaster, is making sure that I keep in mind that I got life outside of work. And
definitely.
I got to be healthy to show up there. But I also think there's an aspect to the community side where, there's not a lot of support for community members who have been on the responder front. So, if you show up to a car accident and, you maybe were a witness, or you provided, those first couple minutes of life support to that patient, there's not really anybody who talks to you about how you're feeling after that experience, or, after, your community's impacted and you're evacuated to a hotel for 6 weeks. I really think there should be more compassion on that front to make sure that everybody's supported. Because I think it was during my master's research in Fort McMurray, I heard so many people talk about the experience of having 4 kids in a hotel room for a month on end, and how draining and mentally exhausting that can be on parents. And so even in this COVID response right now, I think we really do have to be looking at the mental health implications of expecting parents to be teachers, leaders in the workplace, and then also be dealing with some really scary things like, are their parents going to get sick? Do they have immunocompromised family members? And expecting those heads of the household to be really strong. I think we're going to see, obviously, some effects of that in the future.
Yeah, for sure. And I get, you kind of answered the question from the point of view of the first responders and the people that go through the disasters. But I was more so questioning, as part of your schooling of the people that they're these experts, do they keep that in mind for yourselves? Of do they ever talk about what you should do for yourself, or has that just been your own knowing what you need and doing it for yourself? But did they ever cover that for you guys? Because I feel like that's a lot of times they're always looking for everybody else, and I feel like this is the same thing in the medical field and the same thing in talking to Courtney about physio. I think that your own mental health, it should be looked at from every angle, from the patients, from the people administering, at all levels. We need to look at that, especially with something like disaster management. Like you said, all those things that you deal with, I would imagine would be pretty draining on your mental health, and you probably have to do a lot of things to make sure you're watching out for that. But I was just wondering if part of the curriculum, any of that was teaching you guys anything on that front.
Not in the schooling I've done. I definitely think that that's a huge missed opportunity, that and some leadership development classes, and how to support teams through that as well. But you're right. Yeah, it should be much more of a focus, because I think there's this kind of dichotomy where, on one hand, we're always told like safety comes first, look out for yourself, look out for your staff, get enough sleep, eat, drink water, that kind of thing. But on the flip side, there's kind of this expectation that, you don't take those lunch breaks and that you are working around the clock. Yeah. And so it's one thing to say it, but I really don't think as a culture, we necessarily do the best job of living it.
Right. So then feel free to say either to zero or to not answer, but I have a question. How much of that first in, last out do you think is part of your age, and how much do you think of that is part of being a female and maybe a more male dominated? And feel free to say none of it, that has no impact on you, but I had a sneaking suspicion just because of myself, what I've seen of my role being a younger guy. I feel like that definitely has impacts on me.
Heck yeah. Yeah. I think it's the expectations you put on yourself. I think, we're never going to get away from the fact that when you work in any type of career where you're the last line of defense almost, so you're the people who have to go to work when things are going to shit, you're always going to have that expectation of putting the time in. Like no nurse is going to leave her shift right on the dot if she has a patient who's experiencing some distress. So I think that's just a little bit of it is part of the job. Right. A good chunk of it is, being a younger person, wanting to prove yourself. Like you said, I think you probably have experienced that.
Oh, for sure. I had a big struggle with imposter syndrome. I found at the first part, and I would imagine, and like I've said on every podcast, I think almost so far, but I think everybody does. But it really manifests itself when you do have a couple extra factors like that, whether it's your age or whatever determinant factor. One of the big ones why I asked about being a female in a male dominated field is also the bulk fuel field, where what I work in is very male dominated, and there are a few women that I think are spectacular, and some of the brightest minds doing the same thing that I'm doing, and ones that I look up to almost more so than anything. But I watch them go through the corporate world, and when we go to the events where all the marketers from Canada are there, you can tell people go to her husband and ask him about these questions. She's like, no, I run there. Like, it's me. Like he works for me, really. And it's like, oh my, like just what I feel so bad. I know there's nothing I can do other than just be as supportive as I can, but just to watch that always just crushes my soul to see that happen, because there's so much capability there. And really, if you wanted to just go back to like the data points of just take the numbers of what they do and the kind of process they put in and how ahead of the game they are, she's blowing all the rest of those guys away. And it's like, oh man, to watch that and just I feel like that struggle. And I feel like there's a couple of people I'd like to have on this podcast if they'd ever be willing to discuss it. But I just imagine that would be, I can't imagine dealing with the stuff I'm dealing with or dealt with, I guess more so. I felt like I've dealt with it pretty good so far, and I'm a little bit past that, but entering this role at 23 and dealing with all that and all those things on top of it. And then the issue I've seen with females in male dominated roles like that compounded on top of it. Oh, I imagine that would be a very tough thing on your own mental health, especially when you combine it with just the subject matter that you're working with. And that I don't envy the role that you're put in. And I just think it needs to be said with just how amazing it is on even more levels. I think it's a cool role, and it's an amazing thing to do to want to help people like that and want to, bring these disaster roles, but then to lay those on top of it. I just think it's very incredible. And I just want to give you a little shout out there. I think that's very special what you're doing. And I think it's very cool to see. And I just wanted to see if you did find that as issues, or if you had moved past it, or if you're still dealing with it, or if something you wanted to shine any light on in your personal experience.
Yeah, I honestly, I really love my work too. And I think it was a profession that
goes a long way.
Nobody knows that disaster managers exist until we're in the middle of a disaster or until they know somebody. So if I could, plug one thing, I would just say that I hope anybody who thinks it's interesting, like considers it as a potential career path for them too. Disaster management is obviously a huge umbrella, and we need experts from all sorts of places. I come at it from I understand governance and policy and politics and power relationships, and that's what I'm interested in. But, we need engineers and land use planners and social workers and people from all kind of walks of life in there. But I definitely think that it's not only, being female, but anybody who is trying to get into a field that is dominated by people who don't have the same experience or don't look like them, are going to have hard times in a few key areas. And, I heard you say that there's not much I can do except support her. But I think that there's really key things you can do as you progress in your career to if you see that there's a lack of representation in women in the field, to take it upon yourself to if you have the opportunity to provide mentorship to a young woman at one of at your workplace, like by all means make that purposeful. And that's something that's really supported my career, where some really senior men in the field have taken, an interest in my interest and supported me and, sent me to conferences and suggested training for me. And that's made it's small things for them, but it makes a really huge difference in my experience in the field. And I really do try to pass that on when I can. If I recognize that there's a lack of representation, or maybe I'm on a hiring committee and they're overlooking. One thing that I always look for when hiring in the disaster management field is serving experience. So if you can run 20 tables, deal with conflicting priorities, be yelled at, and keep your calm, like that's huge for me. But a lot of people will see that on a resume and say it's not related, and therefore we don't want that person. So there's little things you can do here and there once people kind of open your eyes to what they could be. And then when you do more research yourself.
Yeah, and I think just to counterbalance some of the more pessimistic points I was making there, I do think you hit on an important point there, and maybe I'll elaborate on a little bit. I think passion and determination crosses all boundaries, and when people can see that in you, it doesn't matter what that whether it's age difference, whether it's sex, whether it's any, like you said, just whatever you're dealing with that is differentiating you from what I guess the norm is. Determination and not compassion, passion cross all those barriers. So when people see you that you really care and you're putting in those hours, and they will scoop you up, they will do it right. That is what, and I think that's what I like more with all these issues of kind of society. I think personal accountability is the hugest one that needs to be the basis upon which you build everything else, right? Just like kind of where I wanted to keep stealing away from wealth redistribution into distribution of opportunity and tools, because I think that goes first. But I also think once you have that, and you can show that, it's gonna go far with people, and people will see that and connect, and you'll find those people. If you are passionate about something, the things will fall in place, and the people that you want to find, you just got to keep at it and show that. And I think that is a really good message to send to people, that it doesn't matter what that barrier is. If it seems like it's too big to cross, if you are passionate about it and you are willing to put the time in and show people and not give up, you will be able to cross that, and you'll become undeniable. That's something I hate quoting Joe Rogan because I feel like he is such a polarizing figure, but he always says something about become undeniable. I think he first made the point about comedy, but he's made it about a million different things, and it really resonates with me. Anything you do, if you become undeniable, there's all of those artificial things that are always blown up of people's egos, right? When you struggle as a woman in a male-dominated workplace, it's because of the egos that are fighting back against you, because it's something within themselves that they're seeing that is holding it. Same with age, right? When somebody sees a young person coming in, it's their own ego saying, well, why couldn't I have done that at that age, right? It's all that ego. When you can break past that and become undeniable, all those things fall away, right? If you are a comedian and you feel like, oh, well, nobody wants white males anymore, it's all going to diversity, right? Everyone on getting a Netflix special, that's bullshit. Become undeniable. If you are good enough, and if something's a meritocracy, or as much as you can make it a meritocracy within it, if you can become undeniable, and that's a big piece of what this podcast is. I want to keep trying, and just with so many repetitive ones and different kind of people on that I can learn from, I want to become undeniable, where it doesn't matter. I won't have to worry about what I have to say and really walking the line, because I can become undeniable, where people understand where I'm coming from and really understand me on a deep level. And then you have that freedom, and that's what you become. But I think that is something that can be brought into every walk of life, right? Whether it's disaster management, whether it's, I don't know, any type of business. If you want to become undeniable at anything, you can be. And once you start to go on that path, and I think another important piece of it is you don't have to be undeniable. You just have to be working towards that goal. If you are moving forward with everything in your being to become undeniable, people see that, and that's what they resonate with, and that will catch them on. It doesn't mean you have to get to that point, but if that is your number one goal of your end goal, along the path, that will help you in momentous ways. So that's kind of the nice side of it too. It's not all darkness and unfortunate. So yeah, I know I've already kept you for 2 hours, almost 3 hours here, but I didn't get to ask some of my more disaster related questions. So what are some of the disasters that maybe people aren't thinking about? Don't take how am I supposed to say this? What would be the disaster that you think has the most combination of impact and risk?
So what keeps me up at night?
What keeps you up at night compared to what is actually taking up the mental space, right? Like, I think a lot of people think of, I don't know, what's the most, tsunamis and
fires and floods.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I was looking for, right? That's the predominant thing that takes them in. But there's so many disasters that can come. What do you think should be taking up more mind space that isn't, for logical reasons, right? What is the data pointing us to that we should be more worried about that we're not? That's what I wanted to ask. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. I'll try and do this rapid fire. But the one that I worry about right now is concurrent events. So what happens when we have, an evacuation in the middle of COVID? What happens when something else impacts on us? But in terms of looking at the data and what's most impactful in terms of lives lost, in Canada, we're looking at things like heat waves. And I think heat waves are so interesting because we see the greatest loss of life associated with them, but we don't necessarily have really solid plans for how to respond. And a lot of people think that's because there's disasters that are easy to deal with. So if there's a fire, you put the fire out. If there's a flood, you get rid of the water. What do you do with a heat wave, right? And I think there's disasters like that are resulting in the greatest loss of life, are the highest risk, highest impact, and we are least prepared for. And they're all the disasters that are hard to quantify. So, for example, a couple of years ago, we saw First Nations communities declaring states of local emergency over suicide epidemics. And there was a big discussion in the disaster management field of, is this within our jurisdiction or not? Do we address these things or not? And I always think about it in terms of, like, what are we here to do, right? We're here to prevent loss of life. And if we're losing more lives to this situation, then why the heck are we not addressing it like a disaster? So if there's a fire in your community and you declare a state of local emergency, you're going to get an immediate response from the provincial government, or immediate outpouring of support and donations and attention. But why can't we do that for social issues? So I think heat waves are a huge one, just because of the data and the loss of life, and also due to global warming, we're seeing an increase of prevalence of those events. And then just extreme weather in general, what we used to treat as kind of one-off every 10-year disasters are going to start happening more quickly and more frequently. So we need to really think about how our systems are set up to respond to those, considering that they're going to become habitual.
Right. Okay. No, that makes sense. That's really good. I was hoping you'd say something that I really hadn't thought about a lot. And heat waves is one that I had never given full appreciation. And kind of, again, not to go on another tangent here, but another one like that I always thought was very mind-blowing to me, of the amount of loss of life that we don't even think about, is sleep. And when they say when there's noticeable drops and increases of all-cause mortality around daylight savings on both ends, when you gain an hour, there's a really big, a very noticeable drop in all-cause mortality, right? Heart attack, stroke, cancer, all those things. And on I don't think cancer is actually one of those, but anyway, whatever all-cause mortality is. And then when you lose that hour of sleep, there's a big uptick, like noticeable, like full percentage points of noticeability. And it's just, that is such a clear data point to me of what sleep does to people. And when I hear heat wave, that the biggest thing you're affecting is your sleep, right? You watch all these people can't sleep and they're just trying to get some rest. And I imagine how much of that is compounded by the lack of sleep, because I feel like sleep is still one of those things that we're going to look back in 10 years and go, holy shit, people were dying left, right, and center because they didn't have this knowledge, right?
Well, it's same with mental health, like issues, right?
Oh,
like without,
I didn't even think of that. Oh, fuck. Oh man, if you're in a dark hole where nothing seems good and you can't even barely get yourself out of bed and you have insomnia in that or whatever. Oh, I didn't even thought of that. This is why I do this, because man, that's a whole other area that I was very blind to, right? Like that's what gets me is I have this really well thought out position on sleep and that it needs, and then there's a whole issue where I haven't even, gone down that branch of that tree of how it affects people. But I'm hoping to do it. If I can do it like this, where I can make those connections and more people can take them now, not only is that connection being made with me and you, now people hearing this will understand the aspect of sleep in all areas, right? Maybe you have a child that's going through some mental health and you think that's a big issue, but also they're not sleeping and you don't know that it might be one of the biggest causes and detriments to their health, where you're so focused on all the other parts of it that you don't even realize sleep is one of the things. Because I think it is one of those things where people don't realize the importance of it and are easily, will prioritize other things over top of it, but it's not one of those things we can ignore. And I think it's going to be one of those ones where we look back and go, oh shit, we definitely should have put a little more time and emphasis on educating people the importance of it. So no, that's great. And then maybe last question, how much do they go into the kind of more wacky disasters? Like, do you guys cover every disaster, or is it more based in the ones that are more realistic to happen? But do you guys talk about like EMP? Do you guys talk about, oh, that's so cool. I'm going to have you on right away, because I think all the, and that's something definitely, the suicide rates and stuff, that's another thing that's very dear and dear to my heart. I'd love to discuss with you. But what do you think is take likelihood out of it? What do you think like the top 3 just damaging disasters could be, even if they are very unlikely?
Well, the interesting thing about how bad a disaster is going to be is
Right.
what level of vulnerability the society that it impacts is at before the disaster happens. So there's this
Right.
concept in the disaster management field that there's no such thing as natural disasters.
Yes, I've heard that before.
Yeah, because if something, a storm happens out in the forest where there's no population, it's not going to impact anything. It's a natural process.
Mm-hmm.
But it depends what society it impacts on. So, a tsunami on the coast of Canada might result in more damage because we have more critical infrastructure than in a place where that happens all the time. But on the flip
Right.
side, if there's societies that don't have the means to keep themselves safe, or protect themselves or put mitigation in place, they're going to be hardest hit year over year. So it's that
Right.
it's that concept of vulnerability that comes into it, and that in that way it doesn't make as much of a difference what your hazard is. If it's a fire, a flood, a tornado, it depends on the degree of vulnerability of the people that are experiencing it. Because what you'll see with a lot of disasters is that there's loss of life associated with the impact. But if you actually track out loss of life for 4 or 5 years after that disaster, you're going to see huge increases depending on the level of vulnerability of that community, and also what's done after the fact to reduce the vulnerability.
Right. Oh man, that's so interesting. There's so many. It's funny to think
Yeah.
of. It's so funny to think of the civilian outlook on disasters versus the educated outlook on disasters. Just how much different, how much you don't put into it. So definitely, I'm gonna have to have you on soon again. And I can't thank you enough. It was all I hoped for and more. I had so much fun talking about it. I can't believe that was probably the fastest 3 hours of my entire life. I feel like I just looked up and it was gone, which is
Oh goodness,
I
yeah.
think a great.
I saw
that's awesome.
I saw some of your previous episodes, and I noticed that they went on like over 2 hours, and I was like, I don't know if I have that much to talk about. But you were certainly engaging, and you brought up a whole host of topics that I love talking about. So I'm so thrilled to be able to A, support your podcast, and B, just have this conversation and catch up with you. It's been so nice.
Oh, that's awesome. I really enjoyed it too. And like I said, I'm sure you're going to be on here multiple times over the next couple of years, and we'll have more to say. So anytime you feel like you have something to say, or maybe a cool subject that pops up, feel free to reach out to me and we'll get this going again. Cause I could almost keep going for another 3 hours right now. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll support however I can. Thank you so much, Nick.
All right. Thanks.
All right, there you go. Episode 11 in the books. Thanks everybody for listening. And like I said at the start, if you could leave any feedback, that'd be great. If you can start attempting to listen to this on 1.25 speed or anything higher, that'd be greatly appreciated. You know how I feel about that if you've been listening. yeah, if you could follow the VonDubCast on Instagram, give us a review. Those are all great things. If you have any feedback you want to send my way, the VonDubCast@gmail.com. That's where you can send those. Thank you guys, and we will see you on the next one.